She was dying in a palace of lies, and the kingdom called it mercy. Tonight, you're about to witness a story of survival that will shatter everything you believe about power, loyalty, and justice. A young woman trapped beneath the iron crown of a beloved queen. A king who doesn't know his throne is built on someone else's blood, and a truth so devastating it will burn an entire kingdom to the ground. This is the story of Leora, the Omega who saved a nation while it destroyed her. Stay with me until the very end. You won't believe how this ends. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Now, let's begin. The scream never left her throat. Leora had learned, 3 years ago, that screaming only made it worse. The queen preferred silence. She preferred the soft, choked sounds of submission, the kind that proved you understood your place in the world, the kind that said you knew, deep in your bones, that no one was coming to save you. So Leora bit down on the leather strap between her teeth and let Queen Silvara's claws rake across her back for the 4th time that week. "You're fortunate I'm merciful," Silvara whispered, her breath warm against Leora's ear. Her voice was honey and venom, the same voice that charmed diplomats and soothed crying children in the market square. Another queen would have killed you for that mistake. The mistake had been a calculation error, a single decimal point in the grain distribution ledger that Leora had caught and corrected before anyone else noticed. But Silvara didn't punish mistakes. She punished competence. She punished anyone who reminded her that the brilliance she wore like a crown had been stolen from someone else. Leora's vision blurred as pain radiated through her shoulders, down her spine, into her trembling legs. The stones beneath her knees were cold and slick with her own blood. Above her, through the narrow window of the sub-level chamber, she could hear the palace fountain bubbling cheerfully. Courtiers would be strolling past it right now, discussing the queen's latest charitable decree or the king's upcoming border inspection. They had no idea what happened in the rooms beneath their feet. "Answer me, Omega," Leora forced words through her clenched jaw. "Thank you for your mercy, my queen." Silvara's smile was radiant, beautiful. The smile that had graced 100 portraits, that had launched 1,000 songs of praise. She withdrew her hand, perfectly manicured nails now darkened with crimson, and wiped it delicately on a silk cloth. "There. That wasn't so difficult, was it?" She circled around to face Leora, tilting the younger woman's chin up with one finger. "You really must learn to accept correction with more grace. It's unbecoming to resist your betters." Leora's eyes, storm gray and burning with something she couldn't quite extinguish, met the queen's amber gaze for only a moment before dropping obediently to the floor. Silvara studied her like a jeweler examining a flawed gemstone. "Clean yourself up. I need the water allocation reports revised by morning. The Northern District numbers aren't adding up, and I can't have the council questioning my judgment." She paused, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. "You understand, don't you? Everything I do for the kingdom." "Yes, my queen." "Good girl." The door closed with a soft click, followed by the heavier sound of the bolt sliding into place. Leora stayed on her knees for a long moment, breathing through the waves of pain that threatened to pull her under. Then, slowly, she reached for the bucket of water in the corner, always left there, always the same temperature, as if routine could somehow make horror mundane, and began the practiced ritual of washing away evidence. The kingdom of Rivenfall had been at peace for 3 years. 3 years of unprecedented prosperity. 3 years of wise governance and fair policies. 3 years of Queen Silvara's gentle rule alongside her alpha mate, King Kalen. 3 years since Leora's parents had vanished without a trace. 3 years since a 17-year-old Omega girl with a gift for numbers had been sentenced to 6 months of palace service for the crime of debt her father had allegedly incurred. 3 years since that 6-month sentence had somehow never ended. The morning bells rang across Rivenfall as the sun crested the Ironback Mountains. The sound cascaded down through the 7 tiers of the city, from the palace heights to the riverside markets, calling the kingdom to another day of blessed routine. In the royal gardens, Queen Silvara walked among the roses with a basket of fresh blooms for the hospital ward. Her ivory gown caught the early light, and her dark hair, threaded with gold, fell in elegant waves across her shoulders. A cluster of ladies-in-waiting followed at a respectful distance, whispering admiringly about her dedication. She visits the sick children every week, one murmured. Such compassion, another agreed. The kingdom is fortunate to have her. Silvara's smile was serene as she paused to deadhead a wilting bud, her movements graceful and unhurried. To any observer, she was the perfect picture of alpha nobility, strong, beautiful, benevolent. Only one person in the garden knew the truth. Leora moved silently along the hedge line, her servant's uniform buttoned high despite the warmth of the morning. Beneath the gray wool, bandages wrapped her torso like a second skin. Every breath pulled at the torn flesh across her shoulders, but her expression remained carefully blank. She'd learned to wear emptiness like armor. Leora, Silvara's voice carried across the garden path, melodious and kind. Come here, dear. Every muscle in Leora's body went rigid, but she obeyed. She always obeyed. Survival had taught her that resistance only prolonged suffering. She approached the queen and dropped into a low curtsy, eyes fixed on the ground. Your Majesty, I need you to prepare the guest chambers in the East Wing. King Kalin returns from the border tonight, and I want everything perfect for his arrival. Silvara reached out and tucked a strand of Leora's blonde hair behind her ear, a gesture that would look affectionate to anyone watching. Her fingers brushed the edge of Leora's collar, pressing against a particularly deep wound beneath the fabric. Leora's breath hitched, barely audible. Can you do that for me? Silvara asked sweetly. Of course, Your Majesty. Wonderful. You're such a treasure, Leora. I don't know what I'd do without you. The words were warm. The eyes were ice. Silvara returned to her roses, already dismissing the servant from her thoughts. The ladies-in-waiting resumed their pleasant chatter, and Leora walked back toward the palace, each step a carefully controlled movement that wouldn't jar her injuries. She had survived 3 years of this. She could survive one more day. But as she climbed the servants' stairs to the East Wing, something dark and dangerous stirred in her chest, something that felt uncomfortably like hope. King Kalin was coming home. The king arrived as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. Leora watched from the shadows of the servants' gallery as he rode through the palace gates, his alpha presence commanding even from a distance. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes the color of winter pine, Kalin carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who'd earned his crown rather than inherited it. He'd been gone for 2 weeks, inspecting the northern fortifications and meeting with border lords. The kingdom had been peaceful, but Kalin was not a king who relied on peace. He was a warrior who'd fought in the Scouring Wars, who'd seen what happened to kingdoms that grew complacent. The palace staff lined up to welcome him home, but Leora remained hidden. Omegas of her station didn't attend royal arrivals. They kept to the background, unseen and unheard, existing only to serve. Magnificent as always, my love. Silvara descended the palace steps like a vision, her emerald gown flowing behind her. She embraced Kalin with practiced elegance, tilting her face up for a kiss that looked genuine enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. The north is secure, Kalin reported, his voice a low rumble that carried across the courtyard. The border lords are loyal, and the harvest projections are strong. You've done well managing the kingdom in my absence. Silvera's smile was radiant. I had excellent help, as always. The council has been very efficient. They walked into the palace together, arm in arm, the perfect royal couple. Behind them, servants scurried to unload the king's traveling chests and stable his horse. Leora turned away, heading back toward the sub-level storage rooms where she'd spend the evening cataloging grain reserves and updating harvest calculations. The work Silvara would present to the council as her own tomorrow morning. But she'd only made it halfway down the corridor when a voice stopped her. You there, Omega! Leora froze. She turned slowly to find one of the king's guards, a grizzled beta named Thorn, who'd served in the Scouring Wars, studying her with a frown. You're bleeding through your uniform. Panic spiked through Leora's chest. She glanced down and saw what he saw. A dark stain spreading across her left shoulder blade where the bandages had shifted. I'm sorry, sir. I'll change immediately. Who did that to you? The question was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of authority. Leora's mind raced. If she told the truth, Silvara would know. And if Silvara knew, tonight's punishment would make the mornings seem like mercy. I fell, sir. On the stairs. Clumsy of me. Thorne's eyes narrowed. He'd seen too many wounds, too many lies to be easily fooled. But before he could press further, a door opened down the hall, and Queen Silvara's voice rang out. "Thorne! There you are! I need you to review the new watch rotations." The guard's jaw tightened, but he gave Leora a sharp nod. "Get that looked at, and be more careful on the stairs." "Yes, sir." He walked away, and Leora sagged against the wall, her heart hammering. Too close. That had been too close. She hurried to her quarters, a tiny room barely larger than a closet, furnished with a narrow cot and a wash basin, and changed into a fresh uniform with shaking hands. The bleeding had stopped, but the wound had torn open again. She'd need to rebandage it, and soon. But first, she had work to do. The hours bled into each other the way they always did. Leora worked by candlelight in the small archive room beneath the palace, surrounded by ledgers and reports and maps. Numbers had always made sense to her in a way that people never did. They didn't lie. They didn't pretend to be something they weren't. The northern harvest would fall short by approximately 8% if the weather held. The southern districts could compensate, but only if the grain reserves were redistributed by mid-autumn. The water allocation needed to shift toward the eastern farmlands, where the irrigation systems were outdated and inefficient. Leora's pen scratched across parchment, her handwriting small and precise. By dawn, these calculations would become Silvara's wise policies. The council would praise the queen's foresight, the kingdom would prosper, and Leora would return to the shadows. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the footsteps until they were right outside the door. The latch clicked. Leora's head snapped up, her whole body going cold. It was past midnight. No one came to the archives at this hour. No one except... The door opened. But it wasn't Silvara who stood in the doorway. It was King Kalin. Leora shot to her feet so fast her chair toppled backward, crashing against the stone floor. She dropped into a deep curtsy, her heart racing. "Your Majesty, I didn't know you needed the archives. I can leave immediately." "Stay." The command was gentle but absolute. Kalin stepped into the room, his tall frame seeming to fill the small space. His eyes swept over the scattered parchments, the columns of numbers, the detailed maps marked with her annotations. Then his gaze landed on Leora. Really looked at her. She kept her head bowed, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She could feel his alpha presence like a physical weight, pressing against her omega instincts, demanding acknowledgement and submission. But there was something else too, something that made her breath catch. Concern. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Leora, Your Majesty." "How long have you served in the palace, Leora?" 3 years, Your Majesty." A pause. "And you work in the archives?" "Yes, Your Majesty. I assist with administrative calculations and record keeping." Kalin moved closer, his boots silent on the stone floor. He picked up one of the parchments, a detailed breakdown of trade route efficiency and tariff optimization. "You did this?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, sharpened. "Look at me." It wasn't a request. Leora raised her head slowly, forcing herself to meet his eyes. They were intelligent eyes, searching eyes, the eyes of a man who'd learned to see through deception on 100 battlefields. They saw too much. "Your shoulder is bleeding again," he said softly. "I fell on the stairs, Your Majesty. It's nothing." "Don't." The word cut through her excuse like a blade. "Don't insult my intelligence with lies. I've seen combat wounds, Leora. I know the difference between an accident and a whipping." Terror flooded her system, cold and absolute. If he pursued this, if he demanded answers, Silvara would know. And if Silvara knew... "Please," Leora whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't ask me questions I can't answer." Kalin went very still. "Can't? Or won't?" "Can't, Your Majesty. I can't." The king studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Something that looked like anger, but not at her, at something else. "How long has this been happening?" Leora's throat closed. She couldn't answer, couldn't speak the truth that would destroy her. Kalin stepped back, his jaw tight. "I see." He set down the parchment carefully, his movements controlled. You'll report to the palace physician tomorrow morning. That's an order. Your Majesty, I don't need... It's not a request. He turned toward the door, then paused. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost gentle. I don't know what's happening in my own palace, Leora, but I'm going to find out. And when I do... He looked back at her, his eyes blazing with something fierce and protective. When I do, whoever is responsible will answer to me. Do you understand? Leora nodded mutely, unable to form words. Kaelin left without another word, closing the door softly behind him. And Leora sank to the floor, her whole body trembling. For the first time in 3 years, someone had seen her. Really seen her. The question was, would that salvation or her death sentence? The sun rose over Rivenfall, painting the kingdom in shades of gold and crimson. In the royal chambers, Queen Selvarra dressed for the day with meticulous care, her movements practiced and elegant. She chose a gown of deep sapphire that brought out the amber in her eyes, and arranged her hair in an elaborate style that spoke of both power and grace. She was perfection. She was beloved. She was a lie so perfect, even she sometimes forgot the truth. In the servants' quarters, Leora pulled on a fresh uniform and wrapped new bandages around her wounds with methodical precision. Her hands didn't shake anymore. She'd learned to steady them years ago, the same way she'd learned to steady her breathing and her expression and her heart. She was invisible. She was nothing. She was the foundation upon which a kingdom stood, unacknowledged and unseen. In his private study, King Kaelin stood at the window overlooking his kingdom. He'd barely slept. His mind kept returning to the young Omega he'd found in the archives, surrounded by calculations that were far too sophisticated for a simple record keeper, surrounded by work that bore the hallmarks of the policies his queen had been implementing for 3 years. He thought about her gray eyes, storm-dark and haunted. He thought about the blood seeping through her uniform. He thought about the way she'd begged him not to ask questions she couldn't answer. Kaelin had built his reign on justice, on truth, on the principle that a king who didn't protect his weakest subjects was no king at all. But what did you do when the threat came from inside your own palace, from inside your own heart? He turned from the window, his jaw set with grim determination. He was a warrior, a king, a man who'd fought through the scouring wars and emerged victorious. And he was about to go to war again, this time not against foreign enemies, but against the lies that had infected his kingdom from within. The morning council convened in the great hall, sunlight streaming through tall windows to illuminate the long oak table where Rivenfall's leaders gathered. Queen Selvarra sat at the head of the table opposite King Kaelin, her posture regal and her expression serene. Around them, ministers and advisors shuffled through reports and ledgers, preparing for another routine meeting. Your Majesties, Lord Merrick, the trade minister began. I've reviewed the Queen's latest economic projections, and I must say the precision is remarkable. The grain redistribution plan will increase our winter reserves by nearly 12%. Murmurs of approval circled the table. Selvarra inclined her head graciously. I'm pleased the Council finds merit in the proposal. The kingdom's prosperity is my highest priority. The water allocation revisions are equally impressive, added Lady Thessa, the agriculture minister. Shifting resources to the eastern farmlands will improve crop yield significantly. More praise, more admiration. Selvarra accepted it all with practiced humility, deflecting credit to her excellent advisors while basking in the glow of their respect. Kaelin watched in silence, his expression unreadable. He'd sat through 100 such meetings. He'd praised his queen's wisdom 1,000 times. He'd believed with absolute certainty that he'd married not just a mate but a partner whose intelligence matched her beauty. But now, seeing the documents laid out before him, documents bearing calculations and projections he'd seen just last night in a sub-level archive room, he felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. These projections, he said quietly, interrupting Lord Merrick mid-sentence, where did they originate? The table fell silent. Selvarra's smile didn't waver. I developed them myself, my love. With input from the ministers, of course. Of course. Kaelin picked up one of the parchments, studying the small, precise handwriting. And the calculations, the statistical models? I've always had a head for numbers, as you know. He set down the parchment carefully. I'd like to review the original working documents. The preliminary calculations before they were finalized. A flicker of something crossed Silvara's face, too quick to name, too fleeting to catch. "That won't be necessary," she said smoothly. "I don't typically keep the rough drafts. They're discarded once the final versions are complete." "All of them?" "Yes. Why clutter the archives with unnecessary paperwork?" Kalen leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Forgive me, my queen. I'm simply curious about your process. These projections are remarkably sophisticated. The kind of work that usually takes a team of economists weeks to develop." The compliment landed like an accusation. Silvara's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Are you questioning my competence, husband?" "Not at all. I'm admiring it, perhaps too much to believe it could be accomplished alone." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Lord Merrick cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesties, perhaps we should continue with the agenda." "By all means," Silvara interrupted, her voice still sweet but edged with steel. "Unless my husband has further questions about my work." Kalen held her gaze for a long moment. Then he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not at all. Please, continue." But as the meeting resumed, every person in that room knew something had shifted. The perfect facade had developed a crack, and cracks, once formed, tended to spread. Leora spent the morning in the palace laundry, her hands raw from lye soap and scalding water. It was punishment work, below her usual station, but she'd expected it. Silvara always punished defiance, even unintentional defiance, and being discovered by the king had been the worst kind of defiance. She scrubbed linens until her shoulders screamed, until the wounds on her back tore open again, until the pain became a familiar companion that dulled thought and quieted hope. Around her, other servants worked in silence, none meeting her eyes. They all knew. Not the details, perhaps. Not the full extent of Silvara's cruelty, but they knew enough to stay away from the Omega girl who'd somehow offended the beloved queen. Proximity to Leora meant risk, and survival in the palace meant avoiding risk. So she worked alone, invisible, even among the invisible. "You, Omega." Leora's head snapped up. A palace guard stood in the doorway. Not Thorn, but a younger man named Garrett. His expression was carefully neutral. "The king's physician requires your presence, immediately." Every eye in the laundry room turned toward Leora. She felt her stomach drop. I can't leave my duties." "The king's orders supersede your duties. Come." There was no refusing a direct order from the king. Leora dried her hands on her apron and followed Garrett through the palace corridors, her heart hammering with every step. The other servants' gazes followed her, some curious, some pitying, all keeping their careful distance. The physician's quarters were in the east wing, in a bright room that smelled of herbs and antiseptic. Dr. Marin was an older beta woman with steel-gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She'd served 3 generations of the royal family and feared very little. "Sit," she commanded when Leora entered, gesturing to the examination table. Leora obeyed, her hands folded in her lap. Dr. Marin dismissed the guard with a curt nod, then closed and locked the door. When she turned back to Leora, her expression was professionally detached, but her eyes held something softer. "Remove your uniform. I need to examine your injuries." "That's not necessary, doctor. I'm fine." "The king seems to think otherwise. And between you and me, girl, the king doesn't summon me for trivial matters." She paused. "Now, remove your uniform or I'll have the guards hold you down while I cut it off." Leora's hands shook as she unbuttoned her dress and let it fall to her waist. The bandages beneath were soaked through with blood and fluid. Dr. Marin's expression didn't change, but her movements became gentler as she carefully unwound the wrappings. What she revealed made her breath catch. Leora's back was a canvas of violence. Fresh wounds layered over half-healed scars, layered over old damage that had never properly mended. Claw marks raked in deliberate patterns. Burns. Bruises in various stages of healing. 3 years of systematic torture, written in flesh. "Sweet merciful," Dr. Marin's voice cracked. She steadied herself with visible effort. "How long?" 3 years? And you've received no treatment?" "I treat myself. Water and bandages. It's enough." "It's not enough. Some of these wounds are infected. This one, She touched a particularly deep gash across Leora's left shoulder blade. Has gone septic. You could have died. Leora said nothing. Dr. Marin moved to her cabinet, pulling out vials and instruments with swift efficiency. I'm going to clean and treat these properly. It will hurt. Pain doesn't bother me anymore. The physician paused, turning back to look at Leora with something like grief in her eyes. It should, child. It should. For the next hour, Dr. Marin worked in focused silence, cleaning wounds, applying poultices, stitching what needed stitching. Leora sat motionless through it all, her eyes fixed on the wall, her breathing steady. She'd learned to float away from her body during pain, to become somewhere else. Who did this to you? Dr. Marin asked quietly as she wrapped fresh bandages. Leora didn't answer. The king will ask me the same question. Then tell him what I told his guard. I fell on the stairs. These aren't injuries from a fall, and we both know it. Please, Leora's voice was barely a whisper. Please, just let it be. Dr. Marin's jaw tightened, but she nodded slowly. I can't force you to speak, but I can and will report to the king that these injuries are consistent with systematic abuse over an extended period. What he does with that information is beyond my control. Leora closed her eyes. The crack was widening, and soon the whole facade would shatter. Night fell over Rivenfall like a velvet curtain, bringing with it the illusion of peace. In the palace, lights blazed in windows. Servants moved through corridors on silent feet. Guards patrolled the walls with practiced vigilance. And in the sub-level chambers, Queen Selvara paced like a caged predator. She'd received Dr. Marin's report an hour ago. A simple clinical document detailing extensive injuries consistent with long-term abuse. The physician hadn't named a perpetrator, but she hadn't needed to. Kalen had read between the lines. She'd seen it in his eyes at dinner, in the way he watched her with new calculation, new suspicion. Her perfect lie was unraveling. You were careless, she hissed at her reflection in the polished bronze mirror. Sloppy, weak. She'd been so certain of her control, so certain that Leora would never speak, never resist, never draw attention. But somehow, the king had found her. Somehow, the invisible girl had become visible. Selvara's hands clenched into fists, her nails biting into her palms. She'd built this kingdom's prosperity on that girl's genius. She'd claimed every innovation, every policy success, every moment of brilliance as her own. The council worshipped her. The people adored her. Even Kalen, distant, dutiful Kalen, respected her in a way he'd never respected her before Leora came. She couldn't lose that. Wouldn't lose that. If Leora had to disappear, truly disappear this time, not just fade into the background, then so be it. Selvara smoothed her expression into practiced serenity and left her chambers. She had a problem to solve, and problems, she'd learned, were easiest to solve when no one was around to ask questions. Leora woke to the sound of her door opening. She'd learned to sleep lightly, to wake at the slightest disturbance. 3 years of midnight summons had trained her body to respond before her mind fully surfaced from dreams. She sat up slowly, wincing as her freshly treated wounds pulled against the bandages. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by corridor torchlight. Get up, Selvara said softly. We need to talk. Every instinct screamed danger. But Leora rose and followed because what else could she do? They descended through the palace, past the main levels, past the sub-level archives, down into the deep chambers where stone walls swallowed sound, and no one ever came. The punishment rooms. Selvara lit a single torch, casting dancing shadows across damp walls. You spoke to the king, she said quietly. No, Your Majesty. He found me in the archives. I said nothing. You didn't have to. Your silence said enough. Selvara turned, her beautiful face twisted with something ugly. Do you know what you've done? Do you have any idea how long I've worked to build this kingdom's respect? I know, Your Majesty. I would never. You exist because I allow it. Selvara's voice rose, echoing off stone. Your parents died because they threatened my position. You live because you're useful. But the moment you become a liability instead of an asset, the words hit Leora like a physical blow. My parents? Silvara's smile was cold. Did you really think they just vanished? That their debt was real? She laughed, brittle and harsh. They discovered irregularities in the royal accounts. They started asking questions, so I had them eliminated and pinned false charges on them to explain their disappearance. Then I kept you, their brilliant daughter, as insurance, as my secret weapon. Leora's world tilted. Her parents hadn't abandoned her. They'd been murdered. For 3 years, she had believed she was paying their debt. For 3 years, she'd endured torture and slavery, thinking it was somehow justified. But it had all been a lie. Everything had been a lie. You're wondering if you should tell the king, Silvara continued, circling her like a predator. You're thinking maybe he'll believe you. Maybe he'll save you. She leaned close, her breath hot against Leora's ear. But who do you think he'll believe, Omega? His beloved queen, or a servant girl with a history of mental instability? I'm not, aren't you? I have 3 years of documented erratic behavior, witnesses who will testify to your delusions, medical records I've been carefully building. Silvara's smile was triumphant. If you speak against me, I'll destroy you, not quickly, slowly. I'll strip away your sanity piece by piece until you're begging me to end it. Leora's breath came in short, sharp gasps. She was trapped. She'd always been trapped. Now, Silvara's voice gentled, became almost kind. Are you going to be a good girl? Or do we need another lesson in obedience? And Leora, broken, bleeding Leora, made a choice. She'd survived 3 years by bending, but there were some things that couldn't be bent without breaking. And she was already broken. No, she whispered. Silvara's eyes widened. What did you say? No. Louder now. Stronger. I won't be silent anymore. I won't let you use me anymore. I won't. The blow came fast. Silvara's hand cracking across Leora's face with enough force to split her lip. You ungrateful little... But before she could strike again, the door burst open. Torchlight flooded the chamber, and King Kalen stood in the doorway, flanked by guards, his face a mask of cold fury. Step away from her, he commanded, his voice deadly quiet. Silvara froze, her hand still raised. For a moment the tableau held, queen and king and broken girl, suspended in a moment that would change everything. Then Silvara lowered her hand slowly, her expression shifting from rage to confusion to perfect, wounded innocence. Kalen, she breathed, thank the stars. She attacked me. She's been unstable for months. I was trying to calm her. I said step away. Silvara's mouth opened, closed. She took a single step backward. Kalen moved past her without another glance. His attention focused entirely on Leora. She stood swaying, blood trickling from her split lip, her eyes wide with shock. Can you walk? He asked gently. She nodded mutely. Then come with me. You're under my protection now. Kalen, please. Silvara's voice cracked with desperation. You don't understand what's been happening. She's been manipulating. Be silent. 2 words spoken with absolute authority. Silvara's mouth snapped shut. Kalen guided Leora toward the door, one hand supporting her elbow. The guards closed ranks around them, forming a barrier between the Omega and the Queen. As they left the chamber, Leora dared one glance back. Silvara stood alone in the torchlight, her perfect facade finally cracking. And for the first time in 3 years, Leora felt something she'd thought long dead. Hope. The walk through the palace corridors felt endless. Leora moved in a haze, her body trembling with shock and pain, Kalen's steady hand on her elbow, the only thing keeping her upright. Guards flanked them on either side, their faces carefully blank, but she could feel their curious gazes burning into her. The invisible servant girl suddenly dragged into the light. They climbed the stairs from the sublevel chambers, leaving behind the damp stone and flickering torchlight. The main palace levels seemed almost too bright, too clean, the polished marble floors reflecting lamplight like mirrors. Where are we going? Leora whispered, her voice raw. Somewhere safe, Kalen replied. His tone was gentle, but his jaw was set with barely controlled fury. Somewhere she can't reach you. They passed servants who immediately averted their eyes, courtiers who froze mid-conversation, guards who snapped to attention. Word would spread through the palace like wildfire. By dawn, everyone would know that King Kalen had personally escorted an Omega servant from the punishment chambers. and everyone would be asking why. They stopped at a door in the north wing, guest quarters typically reserved for visiting dignitaries. Kalen dismissed the guards with a curt nod, then opened the door himself. "Wait inside, lock it behind me. Open it for no one except Dr. Marin or myself. Understood?" Leora nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. "I'll send the physician to check your injuries. Tomorrow we'll talk." His winter-green eyes searched her face. "You're safe now, Leora. I give you my word." The door closed softly, and Leora was alone. She stood in the center of the room, staring at the luxury surrounding her. A proper bed with clean linens, a window with glass panes and curtains, a wash basin with warm water already steaming in a copper pitcher, furniture that wasn't broken or scarred. It felt like a dream. Or a trap. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, her whole body shaking with the release of 3 years of suppressed terror. The sobs came in great, wrenching waves that tore through her chest and left her gasping. She cried for her parents, murdered for discovering the truth. She cried for the girl she'd been before the palace, before the torture, before she'd learned to make herself empty. She cried because someone had finally seen her, and she didn't know if that would save her or destroy her. Outside the door, she heard the soft shuffle of boots as guards took up position. Protection, Kalen had said. But protection looked a lot like imprisonment. In the royal chambers, Queen Selvara stood before her vanity mirror, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She stared at her reflection, perfect features, flawless skin, amber eyes that the kingdom adored, and saw the careful construction beginning to crumble. "Your Majesty." She turned to find Thorn standing in the doorway, his weathered face unreadable. "The king has ordered guards posted at the Omega's door. She's under royal protection." "I see." Selvara's voice was perfectly controlled, but inside rage boiled like acid. "And the king? Where is he now?" "In his private study. He's requested a full accounting of palace servant records going back 3 years. Her stomach dropped. "Did he say why?" "No, Your Majesty, but he seemed determined." Determined. That was one word for it. Selvara dismissed Thorn with a gracious nod, then waited until his footsteps faded before allowing her mask to slip. 3 years of careful planning. 3 years of building her reputation on stolen brilliance. 3 years of creating the perfect image of a wise, benevolent queen. And it was all unraveling because one broken Omega girl had somehow caught her husband's attention. She needed to act, quickly, decisively. But she couldn't simply make Leora disappear. Not now, not with Kalen watching. She needed a different strategy. Selvara crossed to her writing desk and pulled out fresh parchment. Her hand moved swiftly across the page, her mind already spinning the narrative she would need. A tragic story of a deeply troubled servant. A mentally unstable Omega whose delusions had grown increasingly dangerous. A queen who'd tried to help, tried to be merciful, only to have her kindness twisted into accusations. By the time she finished, she had 3 letters ready. 1 to Lord Merrick, 1 to Lady Thessa, and 1 to the captain of the palace guard. Each letter painted the same picture, each one carefully worded to plant doubt before any accusations could even be made. She sealed them with her personal crest and called for a messenger. If Kalen wanted to investigate, she'd give him a labyrinth to get lost in. Dr. Marin arrived at Leora's door an hour later, her medical bag in hand and her expression grim. "Let me in, child. The king sent me." Leora unlocked the door with trembling hands, then retreated to the far side of the room as if the physician might attack. Dr. Marin's eyes softened. "Easy. I'm only here to tend your wounds." She set her bag on the small table and gestured to the bed. "Sit. Let me see what damage tonight added to your collection." Leora obeyed mechanically, turning her back to the physician. Dr. Marin carefully peeled away the fresh bandages she'd applied that afternoon, now soaked with blood from where Selvara's blow had torn open the barely closed wounds. "That woman is a monster," the physician muttered, more to herself than to Leora. She cleaned the injuries with practiced efficiency, her movements gentle despite her obvious anger. "The king asked me what I thought caused these wounds. I told him the truth, systematic torture over an extended period." Leora's breath caught. "What did he say?" "He asked if you'd named your abuser." "I said you refused." Dr. Marin met her eyes in the mirror across the room. But I also told him that whoever did this should be tried for attempted murder. You don't understand what she'll do. I understand perfectly. I've served this palace for 30 years, girl. I've seen courtiers rise and fall. I've seen secrets buried so deep they turn to rot. She finished wrapping fresh bandages and moved around to face Leora directly. But I've never seen someone survive what you've survived. That takes strength most people can't imagine. Strength? Leora's laugh was bitter. I didn't fight back, I just endured. Survival is a kind of fighting. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Dr. Marin pressed a small vial into Leora's palm. For pain, 2 drops in water before sleep. And this, she added a second vial, if you need to stay alert, the next few days will be dangerous. More dangerous than the last 3 years? Different dangerous. You've been invisible for so long, but now people see you. That makes you a threat. The physician packed her supplies with brisk movements. The queen will move against you. She has to. You're the living proof of her lies. Leora's hands tightened around the vials. Then why did the king save me? Why not just let her finish it? Dr. Marin paused at the door, her expression thoughtful. Because whatever else Kalen might be, he's a man who believes in justice. He built his reign on it, and once he sees an injustice, he can't unsee it. She smiled faintly. That's both his greatest strength and his most exploitable weakness. The door closed softly, leaving Leora alone with her thoughts and the laudanum for pain she wasn't sure she wanted to dull. Pain, at least, was familiar. Safety was terrifying. Dawn broke cold and gray over Rivenfall, mist rising from the river to shroud the lower city in ghostly silence. Kalen hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his study, surrounded by palace records that painted a picture he'd been too blind to see. Servant contracts that mysteriously extended beyond their terms. Missing persons reports that had been filed and then quietly dismissed. Medical records showing repeated injuries to the same individuals, injuries attributed to accidents or clumsiness. And at the center of it all, one name appeared again and again in his wife's personal correspondence. Leora Brennan, the daughter of Marcus and Elaine Brennan, economic advisors who'd served the previous king. According to official records, they'd fled the kingdom to avoid debt prosecution 3 years ago, abandoning their daughter to work off their obligations. But Kalen had fought in enough wars to recognize a cover story when he saw one. He'd sent riders out at first light to track down the Brennans' former colleagues, their friends, anyone who might remember what really happened. What he was finding made his blood run cold. Marcus Brennan had been investigating irregularities in the royal treasury just before his disappearance. Elaine Brennan had questioned several unexplained expenditures that coincided with Queen Selvara's charitable projects. And then, suddenly, they were gone, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only manufactured evidence of financial crimes that, when Kalen examined them closely, fell apart like wet parchment. His wife had murdered them, and then she'd kept their daughter as a slave, using the girl's intelligence to build her own reputation while systematically destroying her body and spirit. The rage that filled Kalen was ice cold and absolute. He'd married a monster. A knock at the door interrupted his dark thoughts. Enter. Thorne stepped inside, his expression carefully neutral. Your Majesty, Lord Merrick requests an audience. He says it's urgent. Let him wait. He's insistent, sire. He says it concerns allegations about the Queen. Kalen's jaw tightened, so it had begun already. Selvara was making her moves. Send him in. Lord Merrick entered with the self-important air of a man who believed he held crucial information. He was a competent trade minister, but also a notorious gossip who enjoyed being at the center of palace intrigue. Your Majesty, I come with grave concerns. He produced a letter bearing Selvara's seal. The Queen has confided in me about a troubling situation involving one of the palace servants, an Omega girl who's been displaying signs of severe mental instability. Has she? Indeed, according to Her Majesty, this girl has been making wild accusations, threatening violence, showing clear signs of delusion. Merrick's expression was grave. The Queen, in her infinite mercy, has been trying to help the poor creature, but I fear the situation has deteriorated beyond... Did Queen Selvara mention the girl's name? Leora something. A record keeper, I believe. And did she mention that this record keeper is responsible for nearly every economic policy success the Queen has claimed in the past 3 years? Merrick blinked. What? Kalen stood, his full height and alpha presence suddenly dominating the room. Did she mention that Leora Brennan is the daughter of the advisors who mysteriously disappeared after questioning irregularities in the royal treasury, the same treasury the Queen controls? Your Majesty, I don't understand. Then let me be clear. Kalen's voice was deadly quiet. The Queen has been systematically torturing an innocent woman for 3 years. She's been stealing her work, claiming it as her own, and punishing her for the crime of being too intelligent to dismiss. And now, faced with exposure, she's attempting to discredit her victim by painting her as mentally unstable. The color drained from Merrick's face. That's a serious accusation, sire. It's the truth. I have documentation. I have medical evidence. I have the testimony of the victim herself. Kalen moved around his desk, his eyes boring into the minister. So I suggest you think very carefully about whose side of this story you choose to believe. Merrick's hand trembled slightly as he clutched Selvara's letter. But the Queen, she's been exemplary in her service to the kingdom. Beloved by all, beloved by those who don't know what she does in the dark. The minister stood frozen, clearly torn between his loyalty to the Queen who'd cultivated his favor and the king whose authority was absolute. Finally, he bowed stiffly. I will consider what you've said, Your Majesty. You do that. And Merrick, if I find you've been spreading the Queen's version of events, I'll consider it an act of conspiracy. Do we understand each other? Yes, Your Majesty. When the minister left, Kalen sank back into his chair, exhausted. This was only the beginning. Selvara would reach out to every ally, every sympathetic ear, every person who owed her favors. She'd build a narrative so compelling that even confronted with evidence, people would doubt. That was her gift. The same gift that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. The ability to make people see what she wanted them to see. But Kalen had spent years learning to see through deception on battlefields where a single mistake meant death. And he saw her now. Finally, horribly, completely. Leora woke to sunlight streaming through the window and panicked. She'd overslept. The morning duties would be undone. Selvara would be furious. The punishment would be severe. Then memory crashed over her like a wave. The confrontation, the king, the rescue. She sat up slowly, her body aching but surprisingly free of the usual sharp agony. Dr. Marin's treatment had actually worked. The wounds felt bound and protected instead of raw and infected. A soft knock at the door made her flinch. It's Thorn. The king requests your presence in his study. Leora's stomach twisted. She wanted to refuse, to hide in this room forever, to avoid the confrontation that was coming. But hiding hadn't saved her before. She dressed in the clean servant's uniform that had been left folded on a chair. Someone had brought it while she slept, and opened the door. Thorn's weathered face was kind. This way, miss. And for what it's worth, what you've survived, that takes courage. Or cowardice. I never fought back. Fighting isn't always physical. Sometimes the bravest thing is to keep breathing when everything in you wants to stop. He led her through corridors she'd cleaned 100 times but never walked as anything other than invisible. The king is a good man. Fair. He'll listen. And the queen? Thorn's expression darkened. The queen is a problem we should have addressed long ago. They reached the study, and Thorn knocked once before opening the door. Kalen stood at the window, his back to the room. He turned when they entered, and Leora saw the exhaustion in his face, the shadows under his eyes. He'd been awake all night. For her. Leave us, he told Thorn quietly. The guard hesitated. Your Majesty, is that wise? She's not a threat, Thorn. She's a witness, and she deserves to speak without an audience. When they were alone, Kalen gestured to a chair by the fire. Please, sit. Leora perched on the edge, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Kalen didn't sit. He paced, his movements restless. I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning. No detail is too small. Your Majesty, I can't. If she finds out I spoke, she's under guard. She can't touch you. You don't understand what she's capable of. Then help me understand. He stopped pacing and crouched in front of her chair, putting himself at eye level. Lyora, I can't protect you if I don't know the full extent of what's been done. I can't bring her to justice without evidence, and I can't sleep knowing that this happened in my own palace while I remained blind. His eyes, those winter-green eyes that had seen battlefields and bloodshed, held genuine anguish. He blamed himself. It wasn't your fault, she whispered. Wasn't it? I'm the king. Everything that happens in this palace is my responsibility. His jaw tightened. I praised her policies. I admired her wisdom. I believed every lie she fed me while you bled in the darkness below. So yes, Lyora, it was my fault. The raw honesty in his voice cracked something in her chest, and slowly, haltingly, she began to speak. She told him about the day soldiers came to her family's small house and arrested her parents for crimes they didn't commit, about being brought to the palace and told her 6-month service would clear their debt, about the first time Silvara called her to the sublevel chambers and revealed the truth, that her parents were dead, executed quietly to silence them, and Lyora would serve the queen forever or join them in an unmarked grave. She told him about the calculations, the policies, the brilliant economic strategies that Silvara presented as her own work while Lyora labored in secret. She told him about the punishments, the beatings, the starvation, the psychological torture designed to break her spirit while keeping her mind sharp enough to be useful. She told him about the servants who'd disappeared over the years when they saw too much or asked too many questions, about the families who'd been quietly paid off or threatened into silence. She told him everything. And when she finished, Kalen's hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white. How many others? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How many servants has she done this to? I don't know. I was kept isolated, but I heard things, saw things. Lyora's voice trembled. There was a beta girl named Sarah who worked in the kitchens. She spoke out of turn once, questioned why the queen needed so many private meetings with the treasury minister. She disappeared 3 days later. They said she'd stolen silver and fled. And you believed them? I didn't have a choice. Believing meant surviving another day. Kalen stood abruptly, turning away to stare into the fire. I'm going to bring her before the council, force her to answer for her crimes publicly. She'll deny everything. She has documents, witnesses, evidence I'm mentally unstable. I have evidence too, medical reports, financial records showing the theft from your parents, the work you've done that she's claimed as her own. He looked back at her. But I need you to testify, to stand before the council and tell them what you've told me. Terror flooded Lyora's system. They won't believe me. I'm nobody. She's the queen. You're a survivor. And your testimony, combined with the evidence, will be enough to raise serious questions, questions she won't be able to answer. He moved closer. I know I'm asking the impossible. But Lyora, if we don't stop her now, she'll keep doing this, to others, for years. Can you live with that? The question hit like a physical blow. Could she? She'd survived by staying silent, by making herself invisible, by accepting that her suffering was the price of survival. But Sarah had suffered. Others had suffered. And if Lyora stayed silent now, more would suffer. She thought of her parents, murdered for asking questions. She thought of the girl she'd been before the palace, who'd believed in justice and fairness and truth. She thought of the woman she might become if she found the courage to speak. When? She asked quietly. Tomorrow. I'm calling an emergency council session. Kalen's expression was grave. It will be brutal. She'll attack your credibility, your character, everything. But I'll be there, and I won't let her destroy you. Lyora nodded slowly, her decision made. For the first time in 3 years, she was going to fight back, even if it killed her. Uta. News of the emergency council session spread through the palace like plague. By midday, servants were whispering in corners. Courtiers gathered in nervous clusters. Guards stood at heightened alert, sensing the storm building behind closed doors. And in the royal chambers, Queen Silvara prepared for war. She'd spent the morning meeting with her allies, Lord Merrick, who'd returned looking shaken but still loyal, Lady Thessa, who owed her position to Silvara's recommendation, and Captain Rylan of the Palace Guard, who'd been instrumental in disposing of inconvenient servants over the years. The king is being manipulated by a disturbed Omega, she told him, her voice pitched perfectly between concern and sorrow. I've tried to help the poor girl, but her delusions have grown worse. Now she's making terrible accusations to gain attention." "What kind of accusations?" Lady Thessa asked nervously. "She claims I've been hurting her, torturing her." Silvera's eyes filled with perfectly timed tears. "Can you imagine? After everything I've done to help her, to show her mercy when she had nothing." "That's monstrous," Merrick muttered, "to repay kindness with such lies." "The king seems to believe her," Captain Rylan observed carefully. "The king is a good man with a soft heart for suffering. He sees a wounded Omega and wants to be her savior." Silvera dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "But we must help him see reason, show him the evidence of her instability." She produced documents she'd been preparing for months, medical reports from a physician she'd paid off, testimony from servants who'd been coerced or bribed, incident reports of Lyora's alleged violent outbursts. All lies, all meticulously constructed, all believable enough to create doubt. "Tomorrow's council session will determine the kingdom's future," Silvara said softly. "Will we be ruled by truth and reason, or will we allow a delusional servant to tear apart the royal marriage and destabilize everything we've built?" Her allies left with their instructions, their talking points, their carefully curated version of reality. And Silvara sat alone in her chambers, staring at her reflection once more. She'd built empires on lies before. She could do it again. That evening, Leora stood at her window watching the sun set over Rivenfall. The city stretched below her, 7 tiers of stone and wood and life, thousands of people going about their evening routines, lighting lamps, preparing meals, putting children to bed. None of them knew that tomorrow their perfect queen would be exposed as a monster. None of them knew that their prosperity had been built on stolen intelligence and broken bodies. A knock at her door pulled her from dark thoughts. "It's Dr. Marin. May I come in?" Leora unlocked the door, and the physician entered carrying a small leather case. "I'm not here as a doctor tonight," she said quietly. "I'm here as someone who's seen too much corruption in this palace to stay silent any longer." She opened the case to reveal documents, old medical records, incident reports, things that had been filed and then mysteriously disappeared from official archives. "I've kept copies of everything. Every suspicious injury, every servant who vanished, every time I was told to mark accident on a death certificate when I knew it was murder." Dr. Marin's eyes were hard. "I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting my position, that I couldn't fight the system alone. But you're fighting it now, and I'm not letting you do it alone." Leora stared at the documents with tears blurring her vision. "Why?" "Because 30 years ago, I was you. A young physician who saw things she shouldn't have seen, who was threatened into silence by people with power." Dr. Marin's voice cracked. "I survived by staying quiet, but survival without honor is just slower dying. So tomorrow, when you stand before that council, you'll have evidence even Silvara can't explain away." She pressed the case into Leora's hands. "This is proof. Guard it with your life. And when they question you, when they call you liar and lunatic, you show them this. You make them see what I've been too frightened to show for 3 decades. Leora clutched the case to her chest. "She'll come after you. Let her. I'm old, girl. I've survived worse than her." Dr. Marin smiled grimly. "Besides, I'm tired of living in fear. Aren't you?" For the first time since her rescue, Leora felt something other than terror. She felt rage. Clean, burning, righteous rage. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm tired of being afraid." "Good. Then tomorrow we burn her lies to ash." Night settled over the palace, but few slept. In his study, Kalen reviewed his evidence one final time, preparing for the confrontation that would either bring justice or tear his kingdom apart. In the servants' quarters, whispers spread about the mysterious Omega under royal protection and what her appearance before the council might mean. In the royal chambers, Silvara lay awake beside her husband's empty bed, her mind racing through strategies and contingencies and worst-case scenarios. And in the North Wing guest room, Leora sat at the small desk with Dr. Marin's documents spread before her. She read through them slowly, carefully, seeing her own suffering reflected in dozens of other names, other victims, other lives destroyed by Silvara's ruthless ambition. She wasn't alone in this. She'd never been alone. The system had just convinced her she was. As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Leora made a decision. She wouldn't just survive tomorrow's council session. She would burn the whole corrupt structure to the ground. Even if she burned with it, the truth she'd learned was worth dying for. Because silence had never saved anyone. It had only made the monsters stronger. The Great Hall had never felt so suffocating. Leora stood in the servants' entrance, clutching Dr. Marin's leather case against her chest like a shield. Through the partially open door, she could see the council chamber filling with Rivenfall's most powerful figures. Ministers, military commanders, high-ranking nobles, all gathered for what would either be justice or her execution. The carved oak table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs where men and women who'd never known hunger or fear would decide her fate. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air. Beautiful. Serene, completely divorced from the violence about to unfold. "You don't have to do this." Leora turned to find Thorn beside her, his weathered face creased with concern. "Yes, I do. The Queen has half the council in her pocket. They'll tear you apart." "Then at least I'll bleed in the light instead of the dark." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I'm tired of shadows, Thorn." The old guard studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your parents would be proud, for whatever that's worth." It was worth more than he knew. The bells tolled 9, their deep resonance shaking the palace foundations. The emergency council session was beginning. Kaelin entered the chamber first, his presence commanding immediate silence. He wore his formal regalia, the crimson and gold that marked him as king. But his face was grim, carved from stone and resolve. Then came Silvara. She glided into the room like a vision, dressed in ivory silk that made her seem almost ethereal. Her dark hair was swept into an elaborate crown braid, and her amber eyes glistened with what appeared to be unshed tears. She looked fragile, wounded, a queen bearing the weight of false accusations with graceful suffering. The performance was flawless. Leora felt her courage waver. How could she stand against someone who wore lies like queens wore crowns? "This council is called to order." Kaelin's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "We are here to address grave allegations concerning crimes committed within the palace walls. Crimes that, if proven true, will require the harshest judgment this kingdom can deliver." Lord Merrick cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, surely there must be some mistake. The Queen has been nothing but exemplary in her service. The Queen stands accused of systematic torture, murder, and theft of intellectual property spanning 3 years. Kaelin's words fell like hammers. She will have the opportunity to defend herself. But first, you will hear from her accuser." He looked toward the servants' entrance, met Leora's eyes, and nodded once. This was it. The moment that would define everything that came after. Leora pushed through the door and stepped into the light. Every eye in the room turned toward her. The whispers started immediately, shocked, curious, hostile. A servant girl daring to stand before the council. An Omega, presuming to accuse an Alpha Queen. The audacity was breathtaking. The insult was unforgivable. Leora walked forward on trembling legs, each step an act of will. She kept her eyes fixed on Kaelin, using his steady presence as an anchor against the sea of judgment surrounding her. When she reached the center of the room, she curtsied deeply. Not to the council, but to the truth she was about to speak. "State your name," Kaelin commanded formally. "Leora Brennan, Your Majesty." "And your position in this palace?" was a servant assigned to archival work and economic calculations." Silvara's voice rang out, sweet and sorrowful. "Oh, Leora, dear child, you don't have to do this. Whatever delusions have taken hold of you, we can get you help." Silence. Kaelin didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. "You will have your turn to speak, my queen. Right now, this woman has the floor." Silvara's perfect mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing the rage beneath. Leora saw it and felt a dark satisfaction. "Tell the council how you came to serve in this palace," Kaelin said. Leora's voice started soft but grew stronger with each word. 3 years ago, soldiers arrested my parents, Marcus and Elaine Brennan, for alleged debt fraud. They told me my parents had fled the kingdom, leaving behind massive debts that I would work off through palace service. 6 months, they said. 6 months and I'd be free. But you weren't freed, Kaelin prompted. No, Your Majesty, because my parents never fled. They were murdered. The chamber erupted. Voices rose in shock and outrage. Lady Thessa gasped dramatically. Lord Merrick shouted something about baseless accusations. Guards moved restlessly near the walls. Kaelin slammed his fist on the table. Order! You will hear her out! The room quieted, but the hostility had intensified. Leora could feel it pressing against her skin like physical force. Continue, Kaelin said quietly. My parents discovered irregularities in the royal treasury, expenditures that didn't match official records, money disappearing into projects that Queen Selvarra personally oversaw. Leora pulled the first document from Dr. Marin's case, a faded copy of her father's notes. My father documented everything, the missing funds, the forged signatures, the shell accounts. She laid the document on the table. 3 days after he filed his preliminary report with the previous King's Council, my parents vanished, and I was told they'd abandoned me. This is madness, Selvarra's voice cracked with perfectly performed anguish. My love, surely you can see this girl is unwell. These are the ravings of a damaged mind. Are they? Kaelin picked up the document, scanning it with cold eyes. Because these notes reference account numbers that still exist. Discrepancies that, when I investigated last night, are still present in our current records. Lord Merrick leaned forward. Your Majesty, those could be forgeries. They're written in Marcus Brennan's hand. I have samples of his official correspondence from when he served the crown. The handwriting matches perfectly. Kaelin set down the document. But perhaps you're right. Perhaps this is simply elaborate fiction. So let's discuss something more recent. Leora, tell the council about your work in the archives. This was the part Selvarra hadn't expected. Leora could see it in the slight widening of her eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders. I performed economic calculations and policy analysis, Leora said, harvest projections, trade route optimization, water allocation strategies, tax reform models, all the work that Queen Selvarra has presented to this council as her own over the past 3 years. The room went deadly silent. Selvarra stood slowly, her composure beginning to fracture. That is a lie. I developed those policies through careful study and consultation. Then explain this. Leora pulled out a stack of parchments, her original calculations in her own handwriting, dated weeks before Selvarra had presented identical policies to the council. These are my preliminary drafts, my notes, my mathematical models. You'll notice the dates, the progression of thought, the corrections and refinements. She spread them across the table like evidence at a murder trial. Now compare them to the Queen's official policy documents. The final numbers match exactly. The strategies are identical because she took my work, claimed it as her own, and built her reputation on stolen brilliance. Lady Thessa's face had gone pale. Your Majesty, is this true? Of course not. Selvarra's voice rose, losing its carefully modulated sweetness. This girl was a simple record keeper. She couldn't possibly have done work of this sophistication. Why not? Leora's question cut through the room like a blade. Because I'm an Omega? Because I'm a servant? Because people like me aren't supposed to be intelligent? Because you're delusional. Selvarra's mask was cracking now, rage bleeding through the cracks. You've created this fantasy to gain attention, to elevate yourself above your station. My station? Leora's laugh was harsh. You mean the station you forced me into after murdering my parents? The station where you beat me every time I dared to be competent? The station where you threatened to kill me if I ever spoke the truth? Lies, all lies. Then explain her injuries. Kaelin's voice was ice. Dr. Marin, please present your findings. The physician stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the wall, her medical bag in hand. She moved to the center of the room, her spine straight despite her years. I've treated Leora Brennan multiple times over the past 72 hours, she said clearly. Her injuries are extensive and consistent with systematic torture over a prolonged period, claw marks from an alpha's nails, burn scars, impact wounds from repeated beatings. Some injuries are fresh, others are months or years old. She pulled out detailed drawings she'd made of Leora's wounds, clinical, precise, damning. These are not self-inflicted. They are not accidents. They are the result of deliberate, sustained abuse designed to cause maximum pain while avoiding permanent disability or death. The girl is unstable, Captain Ryland interjected. She could have injured herself for attention. No. Dr. Marin's voice was steel. She could not. I've examined enough self-harm cases to know the difference. These wounds were inflicted by someone else. Someone with alpha strength and medical knowledge sufficient to know exactly how much damage a body can endure without breaking completely. Her eyes fixed on Selvara. Someone like our queen, who studied anatomy and physiology in her youth, who would know precisely how to maximize suffering while maintaining plausible deniability. The chamber erupted again, but this time the outrage was directed at Selvara. This is absurd! Selvara's voice had risen to a near shriek. I have never touched this girl, except in kindness. She's been making these accusations because I refused her advances. Yes, that's it. She developed an inappropriate attachment to me, and when I rejected her, she concocted this elaborate revenge. Stop. Leora's voice was quiet, but something in it made the entire room fall silent. Just stop lying. She began unbuttoning her uniform. Gasps echoed around the chamber as she let the fabric fall to her waist, revealing the bandages wrapped around her torso. With trembling hands, she began unwinding them. Leora, you don't have to, Kaelin started. Yes, I do. The bandages fell away, revealing the full horror of her back. 3 years of torture, written in scar tissue and half-healed wounds. Patterns of abuse so extensive, so deliberate, that several council members turned away in horror. Lady Thessa pressed a hand to her mouth, her face greenish. Lord Merrick stood abruptly, his chair scraping against stone. Even Captain Ryland looked shaken. You did this, Leora said, turning to face Selvara. Every mark, every scar, every night I thought I'd die in those chambers beneath your feet. You did this because I was useful and powerless, and that combination made me the perfect victim. Selvara stared at her, and for the first time the mask fell away completely. What remained was cold, calculating, utterly devoid of the warmth she'd worn for years. So what if I did? Her voice was different now, stripped of sweetness, raw with contempt. You were nothing, the daughter of traitors who threatened everything I'd built. I gave you purpose. I let you serve something greater than yourself. And yes, I punished you when you forgot your place. Is that so terrible? The admission hung in the air like poison. Kaelin moved so fast that guards barely had time to react. He was across the room, his hand closing around Selvara's wrist with enough force to make her gasp. You confess? His voice was barely human. You admit to torture, to murder, to 3 years of systematic abuse? I admit to maintaining order. Selvara jerked her hand free, her eyes blazing. This kingdom prospered under my guidance. The people loved me. You respected me. All because I had the intelligence to use the tools available to me. She was a tool, Kaelin. Nothing more. She's a person. She's an Omega. Selvara's voice cracked like a whip. Do you know how many Omegas there are in this kingdom? Thousands, tens of thousands. Weak, simpering creatures who exist to serve their betters. I elevated one of them, gave her value, and this is how she repays me? The silence that followed was absolute. Even Selvara's most loyal supporters looked horrified. Leora stood in the center of the room, her ruined back exposed to the council, and felt something shift in the atmosphere. The tide was turning. Finally, impossibly, people were seeing the truth. You're right, she said softly. I am an Omega, weak, powerless, nothing. She pulled her uniform back on, her movements deliberate. But I'm also the person who saved this kingdom from starvation 3 times, who optimized your trade routes and increased your tax revenue by 18%, who calculated the water allocation that prevented drought-related riots in the eastern districts. She turned to address the full council. Every policy success you've celebrated for 3 years came from the mind of someone you considered worthless. Every wise decision your beloved queen made was stolen from the girl she tortured in the dark. So you have a choice now. Her voice grew stronger. You can admit that your prosperity was built on lies and blood. You can acknowledge that intelligence and worth aren't determined by designation or status. Or you can side with her. She gestured to Selvara, and prove that this kingdom values beautiful lies more than ugly truths. The chamber remained silent, but Leora could see the calculation in their eyes, the slow, reluctant acceptance that everything they'd believed had been a carefully constructed fiction. Lord Merrick spoke first, his voice shaking. Your Majesty, if these accusations are true, if the Queen has indeed committed such crimes, she confessed, Kaelin said flatly. You all heard it. She admitted to torture, to using Leora as a tool, to valuing power over justice. He turned to face the council fully. I am calling for an immediate vote. Queen Selvara stands accused of murder, torture, theft, and conspiracy. Those in favor of a full investigation and trial? Hands rose slowly. First Lady Thessa. Then Lord Merrick. Then others, one by one, until only Captain Rylan and two other ministers remained seated. The motion carries. Kaelin's voice was heavy, with something that might have been grief. Selvara Ashcroft, you are hereby stripped of your title and authority. You will be held in the palace cells pending formal trial. You can't do this! Selvara lunged forward, her alpha rage finally breaking free. I am your queen, your mate. You swore vows. You broke those vows the moment you murdered innocent people and tortured a girl under my protection. Kaelin's eyes were glacial. Guards, take her! They moved quickly, but Selvara fought like a cornered animal. Her nails raked across one guard's face before three more managed to restrain her. You'll regret this, she screamed as they dragged her toward the door. All of you, this kingdom will fall without me. You'll see, you need me. Her voice echoed through the halls as they hauled her away. And then she was gone. The chamber remained frozen in stunned silence. Leora swayed on her feet, the adrenaline that had sustained her suddenly draining away. The room tilted, and she would have fallen if Thorn hadn't appeared at her elbow, steadying her. Easy, miss. You did it. It's over. But it wasn't over. Kaelin turned to face the council, his expression carved from stone. There is one more matter we must address, his voice carried across the room. For 3 years I stood beside a woman who committed atrocities in my name. I praised her wisdom without questioning its source. I allowed suffering to occur beneath my feet because I was too blind to see it. He removed the crown from his head, holding it in both hands. I failed in my most fundamental duty, to protect the innocent. Therefore I am formally requesting that this council consider my abdication. No. Leora's voice cut through his words. Every eye turned to her. She pulled away from Thorn and stepped forward, her legs steadier than they had any right to be. You didn't know. You couldn't have known. She was too good at hiding the truth. Leora met Kaelin's eyes. But the moment you saw evidence of injustice, you acted. You risked your marriage, your peace, your reputation to pursue the truth. That's not failure, Your Majesty. That's exactly what a king should do. She's right, Dr. Marin added firmly. The Queen is a master manipulator. She fooled everyone. You didn't fail, sire. The system failed. But you're fixing it now. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the council. Kaelin stood frozen, the crown still in his hands. The girl you couldn't save 3 years ago just saved your kingdom, Thorn said quietly from his position near the wall. Seems to me that's worth building on, not throwing away. Slowly, Kaelin placed the crown back on his head. Then we rebuild, he said quietly. Starting now, starting with justice. He turned to Leora. Leora Brennan, you are hereby granted full freedom. All records of debt or service obligation are expunged. Additionally, you will be formally recognized as the architect of the economic policies that have benefited this kingdom, with full credit and compensation. Your Majesty, that's not necessary. It's justice. Accept it. Leora nodded mutely, too overwhelmed to speak, but Kaelin wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am establishing a new position within the palace administration, Royal Economic Advisor. The role will carry ministerial rank and full council voting privileges. His eyes held hers. And I'm offering it to you. The chamber exploded in shocked whispers. An Omega. On the council. In a position of real power. It was unprecedented. It was revolutionary. It was terrifying. I can't, Leora whispered. I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than anyone in this room. You've already been doing the work. Now you'll do it with recognition and authority. Kaelin's voice softened. But the choice is yours. You've earned the right to refuse. Leora looked around the chamber at the faces of people who'd ignored her for 3 years. People who'd walked past her in corridors without seeing, people who'd benefited from her intelligence while considering her worthless. Some looked hostile, others uncertain. A few, like Lady Thessa, looked almost hopeful.
"If I accept," she said slowly, "things will change. I won't be silent. I won't hide. I'll speak truth even when it's uncomfortable." "I'm counting on it," Kaylin replied. Leora drew a deep breath, thought of her parents, thought of Sarah and the others who'd disappeared, thought of the girl she'd been and the woman she was becoming. "Then I accept."
The sun was setting by the time the council session ended, painting Rivenfall in shades of blood and gold. Leora stood alone on a balcony overlooking the city, watching smoke rise from evening cooking fires. Somewhere down there, people were living their lives, unaware that the foundations of their kingdom had just shifted. Tomorrow, the news would spread. The beloved queen exposed as a monster, an Omega servant elevated to the council, everything they'd believed turned inside out. Some would accept it, others would fight it, all would be changed by it. "You should be resting." She turned to find Kaylin approaching, his formal regalia abandoned in favor of simple dark clothes. He looked exhausted, decades older than he had that morning. "So should you, Your Majesty." "Kaylin, when we're alone, just call me Kaylin." He leaned against the balcony railing beside her. "That was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed, and I've watched soldiers charge into hopeless battles. I was terrified the entire time. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." He was quiet for a moment. "I need to tell you something, before the trial, before everything becomes official." Leora waited. Silvara will be tried and almost certainly executed for her crimes. The evidence is overwhelming, but there's one thing you should know before that happens. His jaw tightened. "She told me something, while the guards were taking her to the cells. One last piece of cruelty." "What?" "She said she had one final secret, something she'd kept from everyone, including you." Kaylin turned to face her fully. "Your parents didn't just discover financial irregularities. They discovered something worse, evidence that Silvara had been systematically eliminating anyone who threatened her position. Other servants, minor nobles, even a council member who'd questioned her too closely." Leora's blood ran cold. "How many?" "At least 15 deaths over 5 years, all made to look like accidents or natural causes. Your parents were going to expose everything, so she had them killed and kept you as leverage, a brilliant mind she could exploit while ensuring you'd never look too closely at what she'd done." The world tilted again. 15 people, 15 murders. And Leora had been working for the monster who'd killed them. "There's more," Kaylin said quietly. "She claimed your mother didn't die in the initial execution, that she kept her alive for months, used her as another source of calculations and strategies, and when she no longer needed her..." He stopped, unable to continue. "She killed her," Leora finished numbly. Kaylin nodded. "I'm sorry. I thought you should know the full truth before the trial, before Silvara can use it as a weapon against you in her defense." Leora gripped the balcony railing so tightly, her knuckles went white. Her mother had been alive, had suffered, had died slowly while Leora worked unknowingly in the same palace. The rage that flooded through her was incandescent. "I want to see her," she said flatly. "Leora, I want to see her, before the trial. I need to hear her say it, all of it. I need..." Her voice cracked. "I need to know my mother's last words." Kaylin studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Tomorrow. I'll arrange it. But Leora, hearing the details won't bring you peace. It will only bring more pain." "I know." She met his eyes. "But I'm done running from pain. If I'm going to rebuild myself, I need to know exactly what was broken." That night, in the deepest cells beneath the palace, Silvara sat in darkness. They'd stripped her of her fine clothes, her jewelry, her carefully constructed beauty. Dressed in a simple gray prisoner's shift with her hair loose and tangled, she looked almost human. Almost. She stared at the wall and smiled. They thought they'd won, thought they'd exposed her completely. But they didn't know everything, not yet. She had one final card to play, One last secret that would burn the kingdom to ash and prove that even in defeat, she was more dangerous than any of them imagined. Tomorrow, when Leora came to demand answers, Silvara would give them to her. And the truth would be so devastating, so utterly destructive, that it would shatter everything the girl had just fought to build. Because Silvara Ashcroft had learned long ago that if she was going to fall, she'd take everyone down with her, especially the ones who dared to stand against her. The smile widened in the darkness. Let them celebrate tonight. Tomorrow, she'd show them what real cruelty looked like. The morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Leora stood outside the cell door, her hands clenched at her sides to stop them from shaking. Behind her, Thorne shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the entire arrangement. You don't have to do this, miss. Whatever she says down there, it's designed to hurt you. I know. Leora's voice was steady despite the terror coiling in her gut. But I need to hear it anyway. The guard unlocked the heavy iron door, the sound echoing through the stone corridor like a death knell. Beyond it, stairs descended into darkness. The same sub-level chambers where Leora had been tortured for 3 years, now repurposed to hold the woman who'd wielded the whip. There was a poetry to that, a dark, bitter poetry. She descended slowly, each step taking her deeper into memories she'd been trying to escape. The smell was the same, damp stone and old fear. The cold was the same, seeping through clothes and skin to settle in bones. Even the shadows seemed familiar, reaching toward her like old acquaintances. At the bottom, another guard stood watch outside a cell, with thick bars and a single torch for light. Inside, Silvara sat on a narrow bench, her back straight despite the degradation of her surroundings. She'd always had perfect posture. Even now, stripped of power and facing execution, she held herself like royalty. When she saw Leora, she smiled. There you are. I wondered how long it would take you to come. Leora stepped closer to the bars, keeping just out of reach. The king told me you kept my mother alive, that you used her the same way you used me. Ah, yes. Elaine was brilliant in her own way, not quite as gifted as you, but certainly clever enough to be useful. Silvara's tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. She lasted 7 months before her mind broke completely. After that, she was just another body to dispose of. The casual cruelty hit like a physical blow. Where? Leora's voice cracked. Where did you keep her? Oh, various places. Sometimes the same chambers where I kept you. Sometimes other rooms. Once for nearly a month, she was locked in a storage closet just 3 doors down from your own quarters. Silvara's smile widened. You walked past her every day and never knew. Leora's stomach lurched. You're lying. Am I? Ask yourself, did you ever hear strange sounds in the night, soft crying that seemed to come from the walls? Did you ever feel like someone was watching you in the corridors? Silvara leaned forward. That was your mother, Leora, trying desperately to reach you while I made sure she never could. Stop! She called for you, you know, near the end. When the madness had fully taken hold, she'd whisper your name over and over. Find Leora. Save Leora. Tell Leora I'm sorry. Silvara's eyes glittered with malice. But I never did tell you. I kept that secret all to myself. Rage and grief warred in Leora's chest, choking off air and reason. Why? Why tell me this now? Because you need to understand something. Silvara stood, moving to grip the bars with both hands. You think you've won. You think exposing me makes you victorious. But the truth is, Leora, you're still exactly what I made you. A broken girl who survived by learning to take pain, and no amount of council positions or royal favor will ever change that. You're wrong. Am I? Then why are you here? Why do you need to hear about your mother's suffering? Why can't you just accept your freedom and move forward? Silvara's voice dropped to a whisper. Because you're addicted to the pain. I trained you to need it, to define yourself by it. Without me to hurt you, you don't know who you are. The words struck deep because they carried a terrible kernel of truth. Leora had spent 3 years learning to survive through suffering. She'd built her identity around endurance, around the ability to absorb punishment and keep functioning. Without that framework, without the constant threat and pain, who was she? That's what you came here hoping to find, Silvara continued. More pain, More confirmation that you're the victim in this story. Because being a victim is safe, it's familiar, it's what you know. That's not true.
Isn't it? Then tell me, Leora, what did your mother's last words accomplish? What did knowing her suffering change?
Nothing. It just gave you more trauma to carry, more weight to bear, and you'll carry it forever because I put it there, and you can't put it down. Leora took a step back from the bars, her whole body trembling. I broke you so completely that even free, even powerful, you'll always be my creation. Selvara's smile was triumphant. You'll sit on that council and make your decisions and speak your truths, but inside you'll always be the girl bleeding in the dark. My girl, my weapon, my perfect broken tool. The words wrapped around Leora's throat like hands, squeezing until she couldn't breathe, because part of her believed them. Part of her had always believed that survival meant accepting pain, that strength meant endurance, that freedom was just another kind of cage. No, the word came out as a whisper. Selvara laughed. No, that's your grand rebuttal, your powerful declaration of independence. No, Leora said again, louder now. You're wrong, not about breaking me. You did that. You broke me so thoroughly, I forgot what it felt like to be whole. But that's not the same as owning me. She stepped back to the bars, meeting Selvara's eyes with a clarity that burned. You broke me, but I'm the one who survived. You used my intelligence, but it was still mine. You controlled my body, but you never controlled my mind. Not really, or I wouldn't be standing here now. And yes, you've left scars that will never fully heal. But scars are just proof that I survived something that should have killed me. Pretty words, but they don't change the fact that you're still defined by what I did to you. For now, maybe, but every day I'm free is a day I get to choose who I become. Every decision I make on that council is me reclaiming the intelligence you tried to steal. Every scar I bear is a reminder that I'm stronger than you ever wanted me to be. Leora's voice grew stronger. You broke me, but I'm the one who gets to decide what I become with the pieces. Selvara's smile finally faltered. I didn't come here for more pain, Leora continued. I came here to tell you that you failed. You tried to make me into a tool, something less than human, but I'm more human now than you've ever been. Because I know what suffering feels like, and I'll never inflict it on anyone else. That makes me better than you, stronger than you, more powerful than you could ever be. She turned to leave. Wait. Leora paused but didn't turn back. Selvara's voice had lost its cruel edge, replaced with something that might have been desperation. There's one more thing, something I haven't told anyone, something that will destroy everything you're trying to build. I don't care. You will, because it's about Kaylin. That made Leora turn around. Selvara's expression was calculating again, sensing an opening. Did you never wonder why he married me? A king from warrior stock, choosing a woman of minor nobility with no particular advantage to offer? He loved you. He thought he did. But love can be engineered, with the right compounds, the right timing, the right manipulation. Selvara's smile returned. I've been dosing his wine for 5 years, Leora. A bonding agent that creates artificial attachment, makes the subject believe they're in love when they're really just chemically dependent. The cells seem to tilt. You're lying. Am I? Ask Dr. Marin to test his blood. Ask her to look for traces of heartsbane root and devotion flower extract. Ask her how those compounds, when combined, create a false mate bond that feels absolutely real to the person under their influence. Leora's mind raced. If it was true, if Kaylin's feelings for Selvara had been manufactured, he stopped taking his evening wine 3 weeks ago, Selvara continued conversationally. I noticed. It worried me, because when the compounds leave his system, the false bond breaks. And when it breaks, he'll realize that everything he felt for me, the love, the loyalty, the respect, was a lie I fed him for half a decade. Why would you tell me this? Because it destroys your hero, doesn't it? The righteous king who saved you, who stood up for justice. He was my victim too, controlled and manipulated, just like you. Everything he thinks he feels, every emotion he's experiencing about me, about this situation, about you. Selvara's eyes gleamed. How can he trust any of it? How can you? The implications crashed over Leora like a wave. If Kalen had been drugged, if his judgment had been compromised, then everything that had happened in the past few days was built on unstable ground. His decision to investigate, his protection of her, his establishment of her counsel position, were any of those real? Or just the confused reactions of a man whose brain chemistry was returning to normal? And worse, how would he react when he realized he'd been controlled? Would he question everything? Would he see Leora's elevation as another manipulation, another lie in a life full of them? You see it now, don't you? Silvara's voice was soft, almost kind. I win, even in defeat. Because I've poisoned everything so thoroughly that no one can trust their own feelings anymore. Not him. Not you. Not anyone. Leora backed away from the bars, her mind spinning. Guard! Silvara called out. I'm ready to give my formal confession. I want it documented that I've disclosed the use of bonding agents on the king. I want everyone to know that his judgment has been compromised for years. The guard shifted nervously. I'll inform the king, Your Majesty. Former Majesty, Silvara corrected with a bitter smile. But yes, do tell him. Tell him everything. Tell him his entire marriage was a chemical lie. Leora fled up the stairs, Silvara's laughter echoing behind her. She found Kalen in the palace library, surrounded by law books and trial precedents. He looked up when she burst through the door, his expression immediately shifting to concern. Leora, what happened? What did she say to you? Were you taking evening wine? Every night? Wine that Silvara prepared for you? He blinked at the sudden question. Yes. It was a ritual. She said it helped with sleep, with stress. Why? When did you stop? About 3 weeks ago. I had a meeting that ran late, missed the wine, and realized I slept better without it. His frown deepened. What's this about? Leora sank into a chair, her legs no longer capable of holding her. She's been drugging you for 5 years, creating a false mate bond, making you think you loved her when it was really just chemical manipulation. The color drained from Kalen's face. She told you this? She wants it documented, wants everyone to know that your judgment has been compromised, that you can't trust your own feelings or decisions. Leora's voice cracked. She's trying to undermine everything we've built. If people believe you were drugged, they'll question every choice you've made, including elevating me to the council. Kalen stood slowly, moving to the window to stare out at the city. Heartsbane and devotion extract. I've heard of the combination, used in some regions as a control mechanism for unwilling mates. So it's true. It's possible. His voice was carefully controlled. I'd need to be tested. We'd need to examine the wine stores, look for residue. But yes, it's possible. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. How long have you known something was wrong? Leora asked quietly. With her. With your marriage. Kalen was quiet for a long moment. Longer than I should have. I told myself it was just the stress of rule, the distance that grows in any long marriage. But there were moments, small things, where I'd feel nothing when I should have felt something, or question decisions I'd made that seemed unlike me. He turned back to face her. The night I stopped taking the wine, I had a dream about the wedding. And in the dream, I couldn't remember why I'd married her, couldn't recall the feelings that should have been there. I woke up terrified. That's when you started investigating. That's when I started paying attention, really paying attention, to the discrepancies in the accounts, to the servants who avoided certain corridors, to the way people flinched when she walked past. His eyes met hers. To you. If you were drugged, then nothing you felt has been real. Not about her, not about justice, not about, she gestured helplessly, any of this. That's what she wants you to think. Kalen moved closer, his expression intense. That's the final poison she's trying to inject. The idea that if my love for her was false, then everything I feel must be suspect. But Leora, that's not how minds work. Isn't it? No. Because even drugged, even manipulated, I still made choices. I still acted on the information available to me. And more importantly, he knelt in front of her chair, bringing himself to eye level. The drugs are leaving my system now. Have been for weeks. And every day my thinking gets clearer. My emotions more genuine.
And you know what I feel? She shook her head mutely. Rage. At what she did to you, to others, to this kingdom. And that rage isn't manufactured. It's the natural response of someone who sees injustice and wants to correct it. His voice softened. I also feel respect. For your courage. For your intelligence. For your refusal to stay broken. And that respect grows every day, the clearer my mind becomes. But how can you be sure? How can you trust any feeling when you've been lied to for so long?
The same way you learn to trust again after betrayal. Slowly. Carefully. By testing each emotion against reality and seeing if it holds up to scrutiny. He stood, offering her his hand. Come with me. There's something you need to see. He led her to the council chamber, now empty of people but filled with afternoon light streaming through tall windows. On the main table he'd spread out documents. Not the evidence from the trial, but something else. Charts. Graphs. Economic projections. These are yours, he said simply. The original calculations you did over the past 3 years. I've had scribes copying them all night, creating a complete archive of your work. Leora stared at the papers, seeing her handwriting, her thought processes, her solutions to problems she'd tackled in isolation. Why? Because Selvara was right about one thing. You've been defining yourself by pain and survival, but that's not all you are. He gestured to the documents. This is proof, not of what she did to you, but of what you did despite her. Every calculation here represents a problem you solved while bleeding. Every projection represents a mind that refused to break even when the body was being destroyed. He picked up one parchment, holding it carefully. This one, the water allocation for the eastern farmlands, prevented a famine that would have killed thousands. You did that. Not her, you. Another document. This trade route optimization increased merchant revenue by 20% and created jobs for hundreds of families. You did that. Another. This tax reform reduced burden on the lower tiers while increasing overall revenue. You created stability and fairness in a system that was failing. You did that. He set down the papers and looked at her directly. Selvara tried to make you believe you're nothing but her creation. But these documents prove otherwise. They prove that even in the worst circumstances imaginable, your mind stayed brilliant. Your compassion stayed intact. Your desire to help people survive torture and isolation and systematic abuse. Tears streamed down Leora's face, but she didn't wipe them away. That's not pain defining you, Leora. That's strength. Real strength. The kind that doesn't come from enduring suffering, but from choosing to help others while suffering yourself. His voice grew fierce. So yes, she broke you. And yes, the scars will always be there, but you were never just her tool. You were always yourself, brilliant, compassionate, unbreakable at your core. And every day you choose to keep going proves that she failed to destroy what mattered most. Leora pressed her hands to her face, sobs shaking her whole body. But these weren't tears of grief or pain or fear. They were tears of recognition, of finally seeing herself as something other than a victim. Of understanding that survival and strength weren't opposites. They were the same thing, viewed from different angles. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm so scared that I'll fail, that I'll sit on that council and prove everyone right who said I didn't belong there, that I'll make one mistake and confirm that an Omega shouldn't have power. Then you'll make a mistake. Kaylin's voice was gentle. You'll make hundreds of them. That's what being human means. But mistakes made with good intentions and genuine intelligence are fixable. And you'll have support, advisors, people who want to help you succeed. Like who? Half the council still thinks I'm lying about everything. Like Dr. Marin, who's already spreading word through the medical community about what she witnessed. Like Thorne, who's telling anyone who'll listen about your courage. Like Lady Thessa, who came to me this morning and apologized for her blindness. Like, he paused. Like me. If you'll trust me despite everything. Leora lowered her hands, looking at him through tear-blurred eyes. You were drugged, manipulated. How can I ask you to support me when you're still recovering your own mind? Because my mind is recovering. And the clearer it gets, the more certain I am that helping you succeed is one of the most important things I'll ever do as king. He smiled faintly. Besides, you'll keep me honest. If I make a decision based on false feelings or compromised judgment, you'll call me on it. That's what advisors do. I'm not qualified to be your advisor. You're the most qualified person in this kingdom. You've just spent 3 years advising a queen who claimed your work as her own. Now you'll advise a king who'll give you credit. He extended his hand again. Partners? In rebuilding this kingdom the right way? Leora stared at his hand, thinking about trust and risk and the terrifying possibility of hoping for something better. Then she reached out and took it. Partners, she agreed quietly. The news of Selvara's confession about the bonding drugs spread through the palace like wildfire. By evening, every courtier, servant, and guard knew that the king had been under chemical influence for 5 years. The reactions ranged from shock to outrage to a kind of horrified fascination. Dr. Marin confirmed the presence of heartsbane and devotion compounds in Kaylin's blood, though the levels were declining rapidly. She estimated another week before his system would be completely clear. The fact that you were already questioning and investigating while still partially under the influence speaks well of your natural judgment, she told him in her characteristic blunt manner. Most people stay completely compliant until the drugs fully leave their system. Or it means I'm naturally stubborn, Kaylin replied. That too. The council met in emergency session to discuss the implications. Lord Merrick argued that all of Kaylin's recent decisions should be reviewed and potentially reversed until he was certified drug-free. Including the elevation of Leora Brennan, he added, not quite meeting her eyes. Lady Thessa surprised everyone by standing in immediate opposition. Absolutely not. The evidence of her work stands independent of the king's mental state. We've all seen the calculations. We've all benefited from the policies. To reverse her appointment now would be to admit we value political convenience over truth. But the precedent, an omega on the council, is exactly what this kingdom needs, Thessa interrupted firmly. We've been ruling based on assumptions about worth and capability that this situation has proven false. If we reverse course now, we're just perpetuating the same blindness that allowed Selvara to commit atrocities for years. Other voices rose in support. Not all of them. Some council members remained skeptical, but enough to create a coalition. Enough to make change possible. The vote, when it came, was close. 9 in favor of maintaining Leora's position, 7 opposed, 3 abstaining. But close was enough. Leora kept her seat on the council, and Rivenfall took its first real step toward becoming something different than it had been. Bating. 3 days later, Selvara's formal trial began. The Great Hall was packed with spectators, nobles, merchants, common citizens who'd been granted rare permission to witness justice in action. The air buzzed with anticipation and barely suppressed rage. Selvara was brought in chains, her hair roughly braided, her prison shift stained and torn, but even diminished, she held herself with defiance. The charges were read aloud. 15 counts of murder, dozens of counts of torture and false imprisonment, conspiracy, theft, fraud. Each charge was supported by evidence, Dr. Marin's medical reports, financial documents showing the embezzlement, testimony from servants who'd finally found courage to speak, and Leora's testimony. She spoke for 2 hours, recounting every detail of her imprisonment, every calculation she'd performed under duress, every night she'd wondered if she'd lived to see morning. The crowd listened in horrified silence. When she finished, Selvara was given the opportunity to defend herself. She stood slowly, her chains rattling. Everything I did for the good of the kingdom, she said, her voice clear and strong. This nation prospered under my guidance. The people were fed. The economy thrived. Peace reigned. Yes, I used unconventional methods. Yes, I kept uncomfortable secrets. But the results speak for themselves. The results were built on murder and torture, Kaylin said coldly from his position at the head of the judges' table. On the suffering of innocent people. Innocent? Selvara laughed. There's no such thing. Everyone in this kingdom benefits from systems built on someone else's suffering. You just don't like being reminded of it. That's not a defense. It's not meant to be. I'm not defending myself because I don't recognize the authority of this court to judge me. You're all complicit. Every noble who looked the other way while servants disappeared. Every merchant who profited from policies developed through torture. Every citizen who enjoyed prosperity while ignoring where it came from. Her eyes swept the crowd. You want to execute me to feel better about yourselves, to pretend you're moral. But the truth is, you're all just as guilty." The accusation hung in the air, uncomfortable and sharp. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. The kingdom had prospered while Leora suffered. People had benefited while remaining willfully blind to the cost. But Kalen stood, his voice cutting through the murmuring crowd. "You're right. We are complicit. Every person in this kingdom who didn't ask questions, who didn't look deeper, who accepted the illusion of benevolence without examining its foundations, we all share responsibility." He moved to stand directly in front of Selvara. But the difference between complicity through ignorance and active cruelty is the difference between a mistake and a crime. We were blind. You were evil. And this trial isn't about making us feel better. It's about establishing that even queens answer for their crimes, that power doesn't exempt anyone from justice, that the suffering you inflicted matters, regardless of the prosperity you created. He turned to address the full court. Selvara Ashcroft is guilty. The evidence is overwhelming, but her guilt doesn't absolve the rest of us from examining our own failures, from asking how a system allowed this to happen, from rebuilding our kingdom so that no one else can use power to destroy lives while hiding behind the illusion of benevolence. He looked at Leora, and she saw something in his eyes that made her throat tight. Pride, trust, partnership. That's why Leora Brennan sits on the council. Not just as compensation for her suffering, but as a constant reminder that intelligence and worth aren't determined by designation or status. That the people we overlook might be the ones who save us. That change is necessary, difficult, and absolutely essential. The crowd erupted in applause, not universal, but strong enough to shake the rafters. Selvara was sentenced to execution, to be carried out within the week. She showed no reaction, her face carved from stone. But as the guards led her away, she looked directly at Leora and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Leora felt ice slide down her spine. Thank you? For what? For exposing her? For ending her reign? Or for something else entirely? That night, Leora couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something. That Selvara's final message contained a meaning she hadn't yet grasped. But when she tried to pursue it, tried to request another meeting with the prisoner, she was told it was impossible. Selvara Ashcroft was dead. She'd managed to conceal a capsule of poison somewhere on her person, how, no one could determine, and had taken it in her cell before the execution could be carried out. Her last act of control. Her final refusal to let anyone else determine her fate. And as Leora stood in the courtyard hearing the news, she realized what Selvara's thank you had meant. Thank you for giving me the perfect exit. Thank you for creating a situation where death was the only possible outcome. Thank you for letting me choose the manner and timing. Even in defeat, even in death, Selvara had found a way to win. Or so she'd thought. But the kingdom didn't mourn her, didn't create memorials or sing songs of her wisdom. Instead, they started asking questions. How had the system failed so badly? What other abuses were hidden in palace corners? How could they rebuild to prevent this from happening again? And they looked to Leora for answers. The girl who'd survived when survival should have been impossible. The Omega who'd outthought an Alpha Queen. The voice that had been silent for 3 years and now refused to be quiet. Rivenfall was changing, and for the first time since her parents' death, Leora allowed herself to believe that change might actually mean something better. Not perfect, not without pain, but better. And sometimes better was enough. The week following Selvara's death felt like walking through broken glass. Leora attended her first official council meeting as Royal Economic Advisor, sitting in a chair that had been hastily added to the table between Lady Thessa and Lord Cordovan, the military commander. Every eye in the room tracked her movements, some curious, some hostile, all assessing whether she belonged. She wore a simple dress in deep blue, formal enough to show respect, but not ornate enough to invite accusations of overreaching. Her hair was pulled back in a practical braid. No jewelry except a small silver pin that had belonged to her mother. She looked like exactly what she was. Someone who'd earned her place through intelligence rather than inheritance. The first order of business, Kalen began, his voice steady despite the exhaustion still evident in his face, is addressing the economic impact of recent events. Trade partners are expressing concern about Rivenfall's stability. We need to demonstrate continuity and competence. Lord Merrick shuffled his papers nervously. Perhaps we should delay any major policy announcements until the situation settles. No. Leora's voice cut through the room, quiet but firm. Delay signals weakness. Our trade partners need to see that we're not just stable, we're improving, moving forward stronger than before. Merrick's eyebrows rose. And how do you propose we demonstrate that? By being honest about what happened and transparent about how we're fixing it. She pulled out a document she'd prepared the night before. I've drafted a statement for distribution to all our trading partners. It acknowledges the former queen's crimes, explains the reforms we're implementing, and provides concrete data showing that our economic fundamentals remain sound. She slid copies across the table. Lady Thessa picked hers up, reading quickly. This is remarkably comprehensive. You have projected revenue figures for the next 3 quarters? Based on current trade agreements, harvest projections, and adjusted tax structures. The numbers are conservative, but they show consistent growth. These reforms you mention, Lord Cordovon frowned at the document. Reducing penalties for lower-tier merchants, increasing transparency in treasury operations, establishing oversight committees, some of these would reduce royal authority. They would reduce opportunities for abuse, Leora corrected, which is the point. Our trading partners need to trust that we're addressing systemic issues, not just replacing one problematic leader with another. Silence fell over the table. Kalen leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at his lips. The council will vote on Leora's proposal. Those in favor? Hands rose slowly. Thessa first, then Cordovon, then others. Even Merrick, after a moment's hesitation, lifted his hand. The motion carried. Leora's first policy recommendation as Royal Economic Advisor passed unanimously. It was a small victory, but it was hers. The changes came slowly at first, then faster as momentum built. The oversight committees Leora proposed were established within 2 weeks, staffed by a mix of nobles and common citizens chosen for competence rather than connections. The treasury was audited top to bottom, revealing 3 more schemes Silvara had been running. Embezzlement that had been funneled into private accounts and used to pay off potential threats. The recovered funds were redistributed to families of servants who'd disappeared, to merchants who'd been systematically overcharged, to districts that had been neglected while resources went to Silvara's pet projects. It wasn't enough to undo the harm, but it was something. Dr. Marin established a medical review board to investigate suspicious deaths in the palace over the past decade. The final count was sobering. 23 servants, 4 minor nobles, and 2 council members whose deaths had been attributed to natural causes or accidents but showed signs of poison or deliberate harm. Each name was read aloud in the Great Hall, witnessed by the public. Each family received formal apology and compensation. Each death was acknowledged as a failure of the system that had allowed Silvara's cruelty to flourish unchecked. And through it all, Leora worked. She arrived at the council chamber before dawn and left after dark. She reviewed every policy, questioned every assumption, pushed back against comfortable traditions that protected the powerful while harming the vulnerable. She made enemies. Lord Ferris resigned from the council rather than work alongside an Omega who doesn't know her place. 3 merchant families withdrew their support from the crown, declaring they'd never accept rule that elevated servants above their station. But she also found allies. Lady Thessa became a fierce supporter, using her social influence to shift opinion among noble families. Intelligence has no designation, she declared at a formal dinner that Leora didn't attend but heard about later. And anyone who can't accept that is welcome to find another kingdom to embarrass. Thorne quietly organized the palace guard to be more vigilant about servant welfare, establishing a confidential reporting system for abuse that reported directly to the king rather than through noble intermediaries. And Kalen became something Leora hadn't expected, a friend. 3 months after Silvara's death, Kalen found Leora on the same balcony where they'd stood the night of the trial. She was reviewing harvest reports by lamplight, her face drawn with exhaustion. "You're going to burn out," he said quietly, settling into the chair beside her. "There's too much to do. There will always be too much to do. That's the nature of governance." He reached over and gently took the reports from her hands. "But you can't fix everything in 3 months, Leora. Some changes take years. Generations." I don't have generations. Every day I'm on that council is a day people are watching to see if I fail, if I prove them right that Omegas don't belong in positions of power. Then stop thinking of yourself as representing all Omegas. You're not a symbol. You're a person with a brilliant mind and hard-won experience. That's enough. She turned to look at him, really look at him. The drugs had been completely clear from his system for 6 weeks now, confirmed by multiple tests. Whatever he felt, whatever he thought, it was genuinely his own. And yet he was still here, still fighting beside her, still treating her as an equal. "How do you do it?" she asked quietly.
How do you carry the weight of knowing you were manipulated for 5 years? That your marriage was a lie? That you didn't see what was happening in your own palace? Kaylin was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights below. I remind myself that I'm doing better now. That recognizing the manipulation and working to prevent it from happening again is worth more than beating myself up for falling for it in the first place. He glanced at her.
Someone very wise once told me that scars are just proof you survived something that should have killed you. I'm trying to believe that.
Leora felt her throat tighten. I'm not sure I was wise. I was just desperate to convince myself survival meant something. It does, and you're proving it every day. Not by working yourself to death trying to fix everything, but by being present, by making thoughtful decisions, by showing people that change is possible. He reached out and took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks, comfortable without being presumptuous. You've already succeeded, Leora. You've already proven that you belong on that council. Now you need to give yourself permission to actually live in that success instead of constantly bracing for it to be taken away. What if it is taken away? What if the next election brings council members who vote to remove me? Then you'll have had this time.
These months of making real change, of helping people, of being exactly who you were always meant to be. His hand tightened on hers. But I don't think that's going to happen, because people are seeing what I saw that first night in the archives. Someone who cares more about doing good work than claiming credit. And that's rare. That's valuable. That's worth protecting.
Leora stared at their joined hands, thinking about trust and risk, and the terrifying possibility of believing that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be here. The council wants to expand the Economic Advisory Office, she said softly. Add staff, create a formal department with researchers and analysts. They want me to run it. What did you say? I asked for time to consider. I told them I wasn't sure I was qualified to manage that kind of operation. And Lady Thessa told me that if I used the word qualified one more time, she'd have me thrown in the horse trough to cool my excessive humility. A small smile tugged at Leora's lips. She's terrifying when she wants to be. Kaylin laughed, the sound warm and genuine. She is, but she's also right. You are qualified, more than qualified. You've been running economic policy for years. You just did it without recognition or resources.
Imagine what you could accomplish with actual support. I keep imagining it, and then I get scared that I'll fail, that I'll hire the wrong people or make the wrong decisions and prove that I was only successful because I had no choice. Then fail. Make mistakes. Hire someone who doesn't work out and fire them. Make a bad call and correct it. Kaylin's voice was fierce. Because the alternative is refusing to grow, refusing to take on challenges, refusing to become the leader you're capable of being, and that would be the real failure. Leora looked at him, this king who'd been manipulated and controlled, who'd had every reason to retreat into suspicion and isolation, but who'd chosen instead to trust, to rebuild, to keep fighting for something better. I'll do it, she said quietly. I'll take the position, build the department. Try to be the leader you seem to think I can be. Not the leader I think you can be. The leader you already are. He stood, pulling her to her feet. And now, you're going to bed. Because brilliant minds need sleep, and I'm invoking royal authority to enforce basic self-care. You can't order me to sleep. Watch me. They walked back through the palace together, their footsteps echoing through corridors that had once felt like a prison, but now felt like possibility. 6 months after Selvara's death, Rivenfall held elections for 3 open council seats. The process was reformed under Leora's guidance. Voting rights extended to more citizens. Candidates required to present detailed policy platforms. Debates held in public squares where common people could attend. It was messy, chaotic, sometimes frustrating, but it was also real democracy, the kind Rivenfall hadn't practiced in generations. Leora watched from the palace balcony as citizens lined up to cast their votes. Merchants and farmers, craftspeople and laborers, all participating in the selection of leaders who would represent their interests. Nervous? Thorne asked, standing guard nearby. Terrified. 3 of the candidates ran on platforms opposing my council position. If they all win, they won't. People are smarter than you give them credit for. He nodded toward the voting lines. Look at them. They're not just voting for candidates. They're voting for the future they want. And most of them want the future you're building. The results came in that evening. 2 reform candidates won, a merchant named Corvin who'd championed transparency in trade regulations, and a physician named Ashara who'd worked with Dr. Marin on the medical review board. The 3rd seat went to Lord Denholm, one of the candidates who'd opposed Leora's position. Not a complete victory, but not a defeat either. The new council convened the following week. Lord Denholm wasted no time in challenging every proposal Leora made, questioning her data, arguing for traditional approaches. But something interesting happened. The other council members, even some who'd initially been skeptical of her, started defending her work. Not because they necessarily liked her, but because her track record spoke for itself. The economic growth projections Advisor Brennan provided last quarter were accurate within 2%, Lady Thessa pointed out during one heated exchange. That's better than any economist we've employed in the past decade. The tax reform she implemented increased revenue while reducing burden on lower-tier merchants, Cordovan added. The numbers don't lie, and her transparency initiatives have improved our relationships with every major trading partner, Corvin, the new merchant counselor, contributed. I may not have voted for her appointment initially, but I can't argue with results. Denholm found himself increasingly isolated, his opposition based on principle rather than evidence. And eventually, even he had to acknowledge that Leora was good at her job. I still believe the position is unconventional, he said stiffly after a meeting where her budget proposal passed with only his vote in opposition. But I cannot deny your competence, Advisor Brennan, even if I wish that competence came in a more traditional package. It wasn't friendship, barely qualified as respect, but it was acceptance. And acceptance was more than Leora had dared hope for 6 months ago. 1 year after Selvara's trial, King Kalin called a special assembly in the Great Hall. The entire city was invited. Nobles and commoners, merchants and laborers, anyone who wanted to witness what the king was calling a moment of transformation. The hall was packed beyond capacity, people standing in doorways and crowding into corridors, all wanting to see what announcement warranted such ceremony. Leora stood off to the side, watching the crowd with growing anxiety. Kalin had been cryptic about his plans, saying only that she needed to be present and that she should wear formal attire. She'd chosen a dress in deep forest green, simple but elegant, with her mother's silver pin at her collar. When Kalin entered, the crowd fell silent. He wore his full royal regalia, the crown catching lamplight as he moved to stand at the front of the hall. But instead of taking his position at the throne, he stood at the center of the floor, among the people. 1 year ago, he began, his voice carrying through the vast space. This kingdom learned a truth that shattered everything we believed about leadership, justice, and worth. We learned that our prosperity had been built on lies, that suffering had been hidden behind beautiful facades, that the people we valued most were not the ones creating the most value. The crowd murmured, remembering. Since then, we've worked to rebuild, to create systems that prevent such abuses, to recognize that intelligence, competence, and character aren't determined by birth or designation. He turned to face the council table, where Leora sat with the other advisors. And we've been guided in that work by someone who survived the worst this kingdom had to offer and chose to use that experience to make sure no one else would suffer the same way. He gestured toward Leora. Leora Brennan has served as Royal Economic Advisor for 1 year. In that time, she has increased our revenue by 23%, improved trade relations with every partner nation, reformed our tax structure to be both more fair and more effective, and established oversight systems that have prevented corruption and saved lives. Applause rippled through the crowd. But more than that, she has proven something fundamental about the nature of leadership, that it's not about power or status or the ability to command. It's about the willingness to serve, to work harder than anyone else, to care more about doing right than being recognized. Kaelin moved toward her, and Leora's heart began to race. What was he doing? The council has voted unanimously, he continued, to create a new position in Rivenfall's government, one that recognizes the need for leadership that's earned rather than inherited, for wisdom that comes from experience rather than tradition. He stopped in front of her chair, and Leora stood on trembling legs. Leora Brennan, the council offers you the position of co-regent. You would share governance authority with the crown, have equal vote in major decisions, and serve as a check against any single person accumulating unchecked power. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Co-regent, equal to the king, an Omega elevated to the highest position in the land. Leora's voice failed. She tried again. Your Majesty, I can't possibly— You can, and you will, because this kingdom needs you in that role. Not as a symbol, not as a statement, but because you're the best person for the job. His eyes held hers. We're not offering this out of guilt or compensation. We're offering it because you've proven, over and over, that you will fight for justice even when it costs you everything. And that's the kind of leader Rivenfall needs. What about tradition? The crown passes through royal bloodlines. Then we change tradition. We create new ones based on merit and character instead of accidents of birth. Kaelin's voice rose to address the full assembly. Our old traditions allowed monsters to flourish in plain sight. They allowed suffering to be invisible. They valued the wrong things and harmed the wrong people. So we're building new traditions, better ones, starting today. He turned back to Leora. The choice is yours. You can refuse this honor and continue serving as economic advisor. No one would blame you. Or you can step into this role and help shape what Rivenfall becomes, what we stand for, how we treat our most vulnerable citizens. Leora looked out at the crowd, saw faces she recognized, servants who'd worked alongside her, merchants she'd helped with trade disputes, families who'd received compensation from Selvara's recovered funds. She saw Dr. Marin, standing near the front with tears streaming down her weathered face. She saw Thorn, his expression proud and fierce. She saw Lady Thessa, who mouthed two words, "Say yes." And she thought about her parents, about Marcus and Elaine Brennan, who'd died trying to expose corruption and protect people who couldn't protect themselves. They would want this, not the title or the power, but the chance to make sure their deaths meant something, to ensure no one else's parents were murdered for asking questions. I accept, she said quietly, then louder, so the whole hall could hear. I accept the position of co-regent, and I promise to serve with the same dedication and integrity my parents showed, to fight for justice, to speak truth, to never forget what it feels like to be powerless, so I never abuse the power you're giving me. The applause was deafening. Kaelin smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his entire face, and removed a second crown from a cushion held by an attendant. It was smaller than his, simpler in design, but no less beautiful. Silver instead of gold, set with moonstones that caught the light like captured stars. Then by the authority vested in me as King of Rivenfall, and with the unanimous consent of the council, I name you co-regent and grant you all rights and responsibilities that title carries. He placed the crown on her head, his movements gentle and deliberate. Rise, Leora Brennan, not as a servant, not as an advisor, but as a leader who earned her place through brilliance, courage, and unbreakable will. Leora stood, the crown settling on her head with surprising lightness, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The celebration lasted 3 days. The entire city seemed to explode with festivals and feasts, music and dancing, people embracing the change with an enthusiasm that surprised even the council. But beneath the celebration, serious work continued. Leora established her official offices, a suite of rooms in the East Wing that she filled with books, maps, and the best economic minds in the kingdom. She hired a staff of analysts, researchers, and advisors, deliberately choosing people from diverse backgrounds rather than just noble families. Among them was a young Omega man named Terran, who'd been working as a scribe but had a remarkable gift for statistical analysis, and a beta woman named Kara, who'd spent years managing a successful trading company and understood supply chains better than anyone Leora had met. She built a team that looked like the kingdom it served, and together they started solving problems that had been ignored for generations. Water infrastructure in the lower tiers was completely overhauled. Educational opportunities were expanded to include children from non-noble families. A formal system for addressing grievances against powerful citizens was established, with oversight to ensure cases weren't dismissed based on the complainant's status. Every change faced resistance. Every reform had opponents. But Leora had learned something crucial during her years of torture. She was stronger than people thought, stronger than she'd thought, and she refused to be stopped by fear or tradition or the comfortable lies that made injustice easier to ignore. 6 months into her co-regency, she stood before the full assembly and proposed the most radical change yet. "We will abolish designation-based restrictions on employment and advancement," she announced, her voice clear and unwavering. "No position, from council member to palace guard to royal advisor, will be limited based on alpha, beta, or omega status. Competence will be the only qualification that matters." The hall erupted in arguments. "This is madness," Lord Denholm shouted over the noise. "You're trying to overturn thousands of years of natural order." "Natural order is just a phrase powerful people use to justify keeping power," Leora shot back. "There's nothing natural about preventing intelligent, capable people from contributing to society just because of biology they didn't choose." "But omegas are what? Weak? I survived 3 years of torture that would have killed most alphas. Incompetent? I've been running this kingdom's economy longer than most of you have served on the council. Unsuited for leadership? Then what am I doing wearing this crown?" Silence fell. Leora pressed her advantage. "Every argument against this reform is based on assumptions we've already proven false. I'm not asking you to take a leap of faith. I'm asking you to look at the evidence right in front of you and draw the obvious conclusion." The vote was close, closer than any had expected. But it passed, and Rivenfall became the first kingdom in the known world to legally abolish designation-based discrimination. The change didn't happen overnight. Old prejudices died hard. But it happened. And it started something that spread beyond Rivenfall's borders, inspiring similar reforms in neighboring kingdoms, creating a movement that would reshape society for generations. 2 years after accepting the co-regency, Leora stood in the palace gardens at dawn, watching mist rise from the river. She heard footsteps behind her but didn't turn. She'd learned to recognize Kaelin's approach, steady, unhurried, deliberate. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, settling onto the bench beside her. "Too much on my mind. The Northern Territories are requesting economic support for drought relief. The Eastern merchants want to renegotiate trade tariffs, and there's a delegation from Westmarch arriving next week to discuss a potential alliance. All things we can handle. Together." He paused. "That's not really what's keeping you awake, though, is it?" Leora was quiet for a long moment. "Do you ever wonder if we're moving too fast? If we're pushing too hard and the whole structure will collapse?" "Every day. But then I remember that the old structure was already collapsed. We just couldn't see it because it was covered in pretty lies." He turned to look at her. "We're not perfect, Leora. We make mistakes. But we're trying. And we're doing it honestly, with accountability and transparency. That's worth something. She struggled to find words for the complex tangle of emotions. "I spent so long being nothing, being invisible, and now I'm co-regent of an entire kingdom, and part of me keeps waiting to wake up back in that cell. To discover this was all a dream, and I'm still trapped. That's trauma. It takes time to heal." His voice was gentle. "But look around. Really look. This is real. You're real. The change you've created is real." Leora looked out at the gardens, transformed under her oversight. The roses that had once hidden Selvara's cruelty now thrived under Dr. Marin's care. Servants walked freely through paths they'd once had to skulk along. Children played near the fountains, laughing without fear. "I want to create something," she said suddenly. "A memorial. For my parents and everyone else Selvara killed. Something permanent that reminds people what happens when power goes unchecked." "What did you have in mind?" "A garden. Not hidden away, but central, visible, with a stone marker listing every name, every person who died because the system failed them. She met his eyes. And a library attached to it. Free education for anyone who wants to learn. No restrictions based on designation or status or ability to pay. A place where intelligence is cultivated instead of controlled. Kaylin smiled. The Brennan Center for Learning and Remembrance. Just the Remembrance Center. This isn't about my family. It's about everyone who suffered. It's about your family too, and you're allowed to claim that, to acknowledge that your parents' sacrifice mattered. He took her hand. Let's build it together. A monument to truth instead of lies. To knowledge instead of ignorance. To hope instead of fear. Over the following year, they built exactly that. The Remembrance Center rose in the heart of Rivenfall, a beautiful building of light stone and tall windows, surrounded by gardens where 23 trees grew, one for each of Silvara's known victims. The memorial stone was simple but powerful. These names represent lives stolen by unchecked power. We remember them. We honor them. We promise to build a world where such cruelty cannot flourish in darkness. May we never forget. And beneath it, every name. Marcus Brennan, Elaine Brennan, Sarah the kitchen girl. All the others who disappeared, whose families had wondered, whose lives had mattered even when the system treated them as disposable. The library was everything Leora had envisioned. Books on every subject, available to anyone who wanted to read them. Tutors who taught based on ability and interest rather than social status. Spaces where minds could grow and question and challenge without fear. On the day it opened, thousands of people came to visit. Leora stood in the main hall, watching children from the lower tiers explore books they'd never imagined having access to, and felt something break open in her chest. Not pain this time. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy at seeing hope take physical form. 3 years after becoming co-regent, Leora received a visitor from a distant kingdom. The woman introduced herself as Ambassador Therese from the Commonwealth of Meridian, and she came with a specific request. "We've heard about your reforms," she said, sitting across from Leora in the formal receiving room. "About your transformation from servant to co-regent. About the changes you've implemented regarding designation-based discrimination." "Word travels," Leora replied carefully. "It does. Especially when it's revolutionary." Therese leaned forward. "Meridian is facing similar issues. Systemic abuse of power. Discrimination that's become so normalized we don't even see it anymore. And there are those of us who want to change that, who want to learn from what you've accomplished here." "What exactly are you asking?" "Guidance, collaboration, a partnership between our kingdoms to share best practices and support each other in reform." The ambassador's eyes were intense. "You've proven that change is possible, that even the most entrenched systems can be transformed. We need that proof, that hope." Leora felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. Not just responsible for Rivenfall anymore, but potentially for inspiring change across multiple kingdoms. It was terrifying. It was also exactly what her parents would have wanted. "I'll need to discuss it with King Kaelin and the council," she said slowly. "But speaking personally, yes, I'm willing to help however I can. Because no one should have to suffer what I suffered to create change. If we can help prevent that, if we can build systems that work from the beginning instead of requiring blood to fix them, then we have an obligation to try." The partnership with Meridian was formalized 3 months later. Other kingdoms followed. Within 2 years, the Rivenfall Accords, a set of principles around governance, justice, and equality, had been adopted by 12 nations. Leora became not just co-regent of one kingdom, but a voice for change across an entire region. And everywhere she went, she told the same story. Not the story of her suffering, though she didn't hide it, but the story of her survival, her refusal to stay broken, her belief that intelligence and worth couldn't be determined by circumstances of birth. She became a symbol whether she wanted to be or not, but she tried to be a human first. 5 years after Silvara's trial, Kaelin found Leora in her office late at night, surrounded by papers, as usual. "I have a question," he said without preamble. She looked up, noting the unusual tension in his posture. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." He moved to sit across from her, his winter-green eyes serious. "Do you trust me?" The question caught her off guard. "Of course I do." "Why, truly trust me? Not just as a colleague or ally, but as someone you believe has your best interests at heart?
Someone who sees you as more than just a political partner? Leora set down her pen, giving him her full attention. Yes, I trust you. You've proven yourself 1,000 times over. Good, because I need you to trust me now. He took a deep breath. The council has been discussing succession. What happens if something happens to me? Who leads? How power transitions?
And they've raised a valid point. A co-regency works well when both regents are present, but it creates uncertainty when one is absent. Her stomach dropped. You're not sick, are you? No, but I'm also not immortal. None of us are, and we need to plan for continuity. He leaned forward. The council has proposed that if anything happens to me, you would assume full regent authority, not share it with some distant cousin or noble appointee. You would lead alone. Kaelin, let me finish. They also proposed something else, something I initially thought was absurd, but the more I considered it, the more sense it made. His voice was careful, measured. They suggested that we formalize our partnership, not just as co-regents, but as a mated pair, an official bond that would cement succession, eliminate any ambiguity about authority, and signal to the kingdom that our partnership is permanent. Leora's heart stopped. You're asking me to marry you. Well, I'm asking if you would consider a political marriage that would strengthen both our positions and ensure continuity of leadership. He held up a hand. I know what you're thinking. After everything with Selvara, after the drugging and manipulation, I swore I'd never marry for political reasons again. But this is different. How? Because I'm choosing it freely. Because you and I have built something real over these 5 years. Not romantic love, maybe, but trust and respect and genuine partnership. Because I believe we work well together, and formalizing that would benefit the kingdom. He paused. And because I've come to care for you as more than just a colleague. Maybe not the passionate bond stories are written about, but something deeper. Something that's grown from shared purpose and mutual respect. Leora stared at him, her mind racing. Marriage to the king. A permanent bond. Security and power and legitimacy that could never be questioned. But also the loss of independence, the complexity of emotional entanglement, the risk of their working relationship becoming something more complicated. I don't love you, she said bluntly. Not romantically. I care for you, respect you, trust you. But I don't have those kinds of feelings. I know, and I'm not asking for them. Kaelin's voice was gentle. I'm asking if you would be willing to build a partnership that's about more than romance. One based on shared values and commitment to the work we're doing. If love grows from that, wonderful. If it doesn't, we still have something valuable. That seems unfair to you. Why? Because I'm supposed to want some grand passion. I had that with Selvara, or thought I did. It was a lie built on chemicals and manipulation. What you and I have is real, it's honest, and it's built on years of working together, supporting each other, growing together. He smiled faintly. I'd rather have your honest friendship than someone else's manufactured passion. Leora thought about it, really thought about it. 5 years ago, she would have said no instantly, would have run from any suggestion of binding herself to another person, especially someone with power over her. But Kaelin had never used his power to control her, never tried to diminish her or take credit for her work, never demanded anything except honesty and effort. He'd been her partner in the truest sense. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was even better than the romantic ideal people chased but rarely found. Can I have time to think about it? Take all the time you need. This isn't a demand or an ultimatum. It's an offer, a possibility. He stood to leave, then paused. Whatever you decide, nothing changes between us. We'll still work together, still lead together. I just wanted you to know the option exists. Leora spent 3 days considering the proposal. She talked to Dr. Marin, who gave her characteristic blunt advice. Do you trust him? Does he make you better? Does the partnership benefit both of you equally? If yes to all three, then everything else is just details. She talked to Lady Thessa, who was more emotional. You've built something remarkable together. Formalizing it wouldn't diminish that, it would protect it. And you deserve protection, Leora. You deserve security and partnership in someone who sees your worth. She talked to Thorn, who simply said, The king is a good man. You're a brilliant woman. Together, you've made Rivenfall better than it's been in generations. Seems like a solid foundation to me. But mostly,
she talked to herself about what she wanted, what she needed, what she could live with, and what she couldn't. And in the end, the decision came down to a simple truth. She trusted Kalen, trusted him with her life, her work, her vision for the kingdom. Trusting him with a formal bond seemed like a natural extension of that. On the fourth day, she found him in the council chamber and said simply, "Yes, I'll marry you. Not for romance or passion or the things songs are written about, but for partnership and trust and shared purpose. If that's enough for you, it's enough for me." Kalen's smile was radiant. "It's more than enough. It's everything." They were married 3 months later in a ceremony that broke every tradition. Instead of a formal palace wedding with elaborate rituals and strict protocols, they held it in the Remembrance Center gardens, surrounded by the trees that honored the fallen. Instead of guests chosen by rank, they invited everyone who'd been part of their journey, servants and merchants, guards and scholars, anyone who'd contributed to Rivenfall's transformation. Instead of traditional vows about obedience and protection, they wrote their own. "I promise to be your partner in truth," Leora said, her voice steady as she held Kalen's hands. "To challenge you when necessary, support you always, and work beside you to build a kingdom worthy of its people." "I promise to honor your strength," Kalen replied, "to value your wisdom, and to share power with humility and trust. Together, we will lead. Together, we will serve. Together, we will build something that outlasts us both." They exchanged rings, simple silver bands engraved with the date and a single word, partnership. And when they kissed, it was gentle and honest, a seal on a commitment that was about more than romance. It was about choosing to face the future together. The celebration that followed was joyful and genuine, people dancing in the gardens as music played and lanterns lit the night sky. And Leora, watching it all from the terrace beside her new husband, felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Peace. Not the absence of challenge or struggle or hard work, but the deep peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, alongside someone who valued her for exactly who she was. 10 years after Silvar's trial, Leora stood in the Great Hall addressing a gathering of ambassadors from 23 kingdoms. The Rivenfall Accords had grown beyond anything she'd imagined, spawning reforms across an entire continent. Designation-based discrimination was being challenged and dismantled in kingdom after kingdom. Systems of accountability and transparency were replacing old power structures. The world was changing, and she was part of that change. "We gather today," she said to the assembled crowd, "to acknowledge a simple truth. The old ways are dying. Not because we're destroying them out of malice or rebellion, but because they were built on lies that can no longer sustain the weight of truth." She gestured to the memorial stone visible through the open doors, the gardens beyond. Rivenfall's transformation began with exposure of those lies, with facing the truth about what had been done in darkness and choosing to bring it into light. It was painful. It required admitting complicity and accepting change, but it was necessary. Her eyes swept the room, meeting the gazes of leaders who'd come seeking the same kind of transformation. "You've come here seeking a blueprint, a simple set of steps that will magically fix your kingdoms. But transformation doesn't work that way. It's messy. It's difficult. It requires constant vigilance and willingness to question even your own assumptions." She paused, letting that sink in. "But it's possible. I'm living proof. A girl who was tortured and enslaved and told she was worthless now stands before you as co-regent of a thriving kingdom. Not because I'm special or exceptional, but because people chose to see value where they'd been taught to see nothing." "That's the real change we're talking about," she continued. "Not just laws or policies, though those matter, but a fundamental shift in how we value each other, how we recognize that worth isn't determined by birth or designation or circumstances, how we build systems that elevate the best in us instead of protecting the worst." She looked at Kalen, standing to her left, at Dr. Marin, now head of a kingdom-wide medical reform initiative, at Lady Thessa, who'd become Rivenfall's ambassador to the Commonwealth, at Thorn, promoted to captain of the Royal Guard, an architect of military reforms that prioritize protection over domination, at all the people who'd chosen to believe change was possible and had worked themselves to exhaustion making it real. "This is what we've built," she said quietly. "Not a perfect kingdom, not a utopia free of problems or challenges,
but a place where suffering is acknowledged instead of hidden, where mistakes are corrected instead of covered up, where people are valued for their contributions instead of their circumstances. And if we can do it here, she finished, her voice rising with conviction, you can do it in your kingdoms. You can create systems that serve justice instead of power. You can build societies where the next generation doesn't have to bleed in silence to create change. The applause was thunderous. That night, Leora stood on the familiar balcony, looking out at a city transformed. The lower tiers were better lit now, with street lamps funded by reformed tax revenue. The river ran cleaner, thanks to infrastructure improvements. The markets bustled with merchants who operated under fair regulations instead of corrupt systems. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems to solve, still inequities to address, still people who resisted change. But it was better. Demonstrably, measurably better. Kaylin joined her, slipping an arm around her waist in the casual affection they'd developed over years of partnership. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Accepting the co-regency? Taking on all this responsibility? Leora thought about it, really thought about it. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of just surviving, of having clear enemies and simple goals. She leaned into his embrace. But then I remember what surviving for the sake of survival felt like. How empty it was. How much of myself I had to cut away just to endure another day. And now? Now I'm whole. Or at least, I'm becoming whole. Putting back together the pieces Selvora broke, but building something different, something stronger. She turned to face him. So no, I don't regret it. Even on the hardest days when everything feels impossible and I want to quit, I don't regret choosing this life over the alternative. Good, because I'm pretty sure the kingdom would collapse without you. She laughed. Dramatic much? I'm serious. You've become the heart of this place, the conscience that keeps us honest, the voice that reminds us why we're doing this hard work. His expression softened. You've become exactly what your parents hoped you'd be, someone who makes the world better simply by being in it. Tears pricked at Leora's eyes. They would have liked you, I think. My father would have appreciated your commitment to justice. My mother would have loved your terrible jokes. My jokes aren't terrible. They're absolutely terrible, but I've grown fond of them anyway. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their kingdom settle into night, and Leora thought about the girl she'd been, broken and bleeding in sub-level chambers, convinced she would die without ever being seen. That girl would never have believed this future was possible. But she'd survived long enough to discover it was, and that made every scar, every nightmare, every moment of terror worthwhile. Because she hadn't just survived, she'd transformed. She'd taken the darkest experience imaginable and used it as fuel to create light. And now she stood in that light, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a leader who'd earned her place through brilliance, courage, and unbreakable will. The invisible girl had become visible. The broken weapon had become a whole person. The bleeding servant had become a crowned queen, not because someone rescued her, but because she rescued herself. And then she helped an entire kingdom learn to do the same. In the gardens below, the trees of the Remembrance Center swayed in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering the names of those who'd fallen so others could rise. Leora closed her eyes and whispered back, I remember, I honor you, and I promise your suffering meant something. It changed everything. The wind carried her words into the night, into the future. Into the kingdom, she and Kaylin and countless others were building one honest decision at a time. It wasn't the ending anyone would have predicted, but it was real, it was earned, and it was finally enough.